remarks from Plug-in America's Executive Director, Joel Levin. If you want to go over to that remark now, please go ahead on the back end, everyone.
Represents the voice of the EV consumer. Hello and welcome to the third annual Arizona Transportation Electrification Forum to discuss how Arizona can drive the electric vehicle transition and best leverage incoming federal EV funds to maximize benefits for the state. I'm Joel Levin, Executive Director of Plug-in America. Plug-in America is a nonprofit organization that represents the voice of the EV consumer in Arizona and nationwide. We have a mission for all Americans to be able to drive electric. We're excited to host this forum with the Southwest Energy Efficiency Project, also known as SWEEP, and we are honored and excited to have leaders from across Arizona participating in the forum today. Part of what we're doing is focusing today on Arizona's state EV infrastructure deployment plan that is due by August 1st. For this reason, we've brought together every key entity necessary for transitioning that plan to effective deployment of EV charging across Arizona. We have federal Arizona legislators who demonstrated leadership on EVs, ADOT, which is developing the plan, and the Arizona FHWA division office that works closely with them, and the Arizona Commerce Authority. We have the new federal joint office for energy and transportation that issued the guidance on the plan and will be receiving the plan. And we also have Routes, which is the U.S. Department of Transportation office that focuses on rural transportation infrastructure. So Arizona has a unique opportunity to really become a leader among states on the EV transition. The growing manufacturing hub in the state will create good paying jobs and can bring significant economic growth to Arizona communities. We're excited that representatives from across industry are also here with us today. But most importantly, you are here, the stakeholder. Through your input, you are what will help to make the future of transportation work for Arizonans. The breakout sessions later in the program are the perfect opportunity to make your voice heard to help shape Arizona's plan for years to come. Please share your thoughts and your questions throughout the forum, but especially during the breakout sessions, and you can help to shape the EV infrastructure deployment plan. Thank you for your participation, and we look forward to future engagement opportunities to help Arizona to drive the EV transition and deliver real-world benefits to communities across the state.
Thank you, Joel, for that introduction. Now we are going to go over to a recorded remark from Arizona Commerce Authority President and CEO, Sandra Watson. Please start the video now.
Hello, I'm Sandra Watson, President and CEO of the Arizona Commerce Authority. I'm honored to help kick off Arizona's third annual Transportation Electrification Forum. We are witnessing incredible innovation in the mobility sector, and Arizona has been at the forefront. From electric and automated vehicles to battery and renewable energy production, Arizona is a place where mobility innovation happens. None of this is by accident. It's a result of continual collaboration and a focus to drive the technologies of tomorrow. When it comes to electric vehicles, Arizona continues to punch above its weight. While ranking 14th in population size, Arizona is a top 7 state for the rate of EV ownership. We're the proud home of EV manufacturers like Lucid, Nikola, Electric Mechanica, Atlas Motor Vehicles, and Zero Electric Vehicles. We have a rapidly growing EV supply chain that includes leaders like UACJ, Whitehall, Jomi Engineering, Core Power, Lifecycle, Amsura, and more. These companies complement a growing list of auto companies developing and testing new technologies throughout our state. And they're working closely with our leading universities and research partners. It's no wonder, then, that national industry commentators have labeled Arizona a modern-day salon for EV innovators. As I mentioned, these developments have not taken place in a vacuum. They are the result of hard-working entrepreneurs and forward-thinking policies that have opened our state for innovation. I want to credit everyone taking part in this year's forum for your leadership. I also want to acknowledge Arizona's elected leaders for advancing policies that welcome emerging technologies. Under Governor Ducey, Arizona has adopted a vision to accelerate mobility innovation. This includes implementing one of the first regulatory frameworks for the safe testing of automated vehicles and passing the first legislation to pave the way for 5G deployment. In addition, in 2018, the governor launched the Institute of Automated Mobility to further AV collaboration. Now, with abundant federal funding opportunities ahead, Arizona is well positioned to take full advantage. One way the state is preparing is through the Infrastructure Investment Jobs Act Task Force. Established by the governor in April, the task force is comprised of experts from state government, industry, academia, and more, with a focus on aligning state activities around these funds. With proper coordination and the right strategy, Arizona can make these funds benefit our state for generations to come. In closing, I'd like to thank again all of today's participants and our elected leaders for your collaboration around this issue. It's an incredibly exciting time in Arizona as we look to the future of auto electrification. I'm looking forward to hearing more from today's fantastic lineup of speakers. Thank you.
Wonderful. Thank you so much for that, Sandra. And Sandra does send her regrets for not being able to attend live today, but we're very excited for some of the marks that she just made. And I'm also pleased to present as well. We have some remarks from Arizona Department of Transportation Director John Holikowski, and he's going to discuss a little bit of some of the efforts that ADOT is moving forward right now when it comes to transportation electrification, as well as in response to the federal stimulus when it comes to electric vehicle network charging. And with that, I am pleased to introduce Arizona Department of Transportation Director John Holikowski. John, please take it away when you're ready.
Well, good morning, Karen, and thank you. Unlike my other fellow agency directors, I'm here live today. I'm not a recording, so you're going to get the real me. As Karen said, I'm director of the Arizona Department of Transportation, and I really do appreciate the opportunity to be with you today. And I'm happy to see so many people who are here excited about Arizona's future as we find ways to expand equitable electric vehicle adoption and build a network of charging stations throughout the state. As you heard from the prior two speakers, this really is a partnership. No one agency does this alone. IIJA is a complex piece of legislation with many different factors that we have to consider, and even the subset of electrification for vehicles is also complex as we are digesting it and understanding all of the nuances. So at ADOT, we have over 3,600 employees who are dedicated to planning, building, and maintaining the state's multimodal transportation system. But one thing I also want to point out is we're one of the most comprehensive DOTs in the nation. Besides maintaining, operating, and constructing the highway systems of the state, we also encompass the motor vehicle division among our business lines. And we have 138 fully sworn police officers who man 22 ports of entry around the state, along with 5 of them at the international border. So we're quite a comprehensive DOT, and we're very excited to take on this new mission of assisting and partnering with electrification for vehicles. So many of the tools we use today are identifying problems and possible solutions. And given the comprehensive nature of our DOT, we have to employ a total systems approach in the way that we solve problems and take on new missions. We want to ensure that as we're making any changes and improvements, we're hearing from all of the voices and making sure that we're listening to everyone and taking into account our development of plans that work best for all. So that same approach is what we're taking as we're developing the state's electrical vehicle infrastructure deployment plan. It's quite a mouthful. So as you likely know, Arizona is going to receive about $76.5 million over the next 5 years under the new National Electric Vehicle Infrastructure Formula Program as part of the Federal Jobs Infrastructure Investment Act. So to access those funds, we're required to submit our deployment plan by August 1st. It's a quickly approaching deadline, as we're all aware, and we have a lot to accomplish. But first and foremost, we have to ensure that everyone has a voice as we move forward. And I want to keep stressing that because it's very important that we all are partnering and participating together to bring this mission to a successful completion as we continue to improve on electrification. So public outreach is a major component of the plan that we're developing. So I'd like to give you just a brief overview of our progress so far and highlight some of the ways we're reaching out to the public and a variety of stakeholders. So just last month, ADOT hired AECOM consultants to assist with the plan and our outreach efforts, and we've already begun seeking input from the public and stakeholders. So far, we've identified more than 400 stakeholders, including representatives from the electric vehicle industry, utility providers, and others. We held a stakeholder meeting on June 30th. We've reached out to representatives from all Native American tribes in Arizona to include in the conversation. And we're also reaching out specifically to 6 tribes located near the current alternative fuel corridors. This would be the Colorado River Indian tribes, the Gila River Indian community, the Hopi tribe, Navajo Nation, and Tohono O'odham Nation, and the Yavapai Apache Nation, to make certain that their input is heard. Other stakeholder outreach has included municipalities, metropolitan planning organizations, councils of governments, advocacy groups, and emergency management and public safety agencies. Of course, we're also meeting with our federal partners and coordinating with them, and they'll be key in helping us to identify potential future corridors. To ensure that all members of the public can participate regardless of their access to technology, outreach efforts include future in-person and virtual tools, public meetings, surveys, comments by email, comments by snail mail, or by phone. So we're already getting some feedback, as you can imagine. A lot of interest has been expressed. Industry representatives are telling us that this technology is advancing and changing quickly. And I think if you're keeping up with the literature, as I am and many of us are here, you're reading of incredible advancements in charging stations, batteries, battery life, battery materials. It is an exciting time in this area of vehicle electrification. So the industry representatives have recommended to us that the infrastructure we choose is something that allows for easy upgrades in the future. As we've seen with many technologies in the past, it may be the latest and greatest thing and you want to go and advance it quickly and put it in, only to realize that in a dynamic industry like this, a few years later, what you put into the infrastructure may be outdated. So we want to be certain as we're listening to voices that we are being flexible in the infrastructure we put in to allow for upgrades in the future. We're also hearing that more alternative fuel corridors are desired. Right now, we know that the federal guidance is focused on building out the electric vehicle network, initially along the interstate highways. But as we're listening to the voices of our customers, we hope in the future to be able to add new eligible corridors to meet their needs also. So we're wanting to hear from the public and our stakeholders to gain that input on where those future corridors should be added after the interstate network is developed. So we have a number of meetings planned, including a virtual public involvement meeting on the evening of July 14th that can be accessed online or by phone. Once we submit the plan, obviously the work is going to continue. we'll submit Arizona's initial high-level plan by the August 1st deadline, but that's just the first step. Further plan refinements will follow. Over time, the plan will evolve with public and stakeholder input and the eventual addition of new alternative fuel corridors. From there, we're going to be required to update the plan annually. So as you've heard from Sandra, electric vehicle sales are on the rise. And with stakeholder input, we'll figure out how we're going to have a great opportunity to develop a network of chargers that will help facilitate equitable public electric vehicle adoption. So we've got a lot of decisions to make right now, and that will impact our drivers in the future. So I'm confident that we're going to make better decisions if everyone has a voice. So I invite you to attend our virtual public meeting on July 14th and take our survey. Details can be found on ADOT's website at azdot.gov/EV plan. I also encourage you to share the meeting and survey details with your network. And finally, I want to thank everyone involved, including leadership from the Federal Highway Administration, US DOT, Maricopa Association of Governments, the Arizona Commerce Authority, the Arizona Corporation Commission, the utilities represented here today, and everyone in the audience for having an interest in working with us to develop the electric vehicle infrastructure here in Arizona and across America. So my thanks to you for events like this forum to keep the conversation going and allow us to continue our collaboration as we work towards a future that we're all excited for. We've been given what I believe is a great responsibility to change the dynamics again of transportation in America. And I'm looking forward to working with all of you to meet that responsibility and excel at installing the electrification network. So I'm here today with you, and I'm proud that Arizona is positioned to lead the way. So thank you, Karen, and back to you.
Thank you so much, John. Something I really took from what you just said was the need for, not putting these plans together in a vacuum, working with other people and ensuring that stakeholder voices are heard as ADOT and as the state at large is continuing to advance transportation electrification. So thank you so much for your remarks and for joining us today. So now I would like to transition to a special presentation that we have with Steve Lamel with the Joint Office of Energy and Transportation, which was a new office formed as a part of the bipartisan infrastructure law. Steve is going to review for you, and we can go ahead and transition to the slide deck. Steve is going to review for all of us an overview of state EV infrastructure deployment plans and Arizona state plan. So now, Steve, I would like to invite you to come off mute and turn on your video. Thank you so much.
Great, thanks, Karen. It's so nice to be with all of you today, and really appreciated that overview of what Arizona is up to by John with respect to the development of the NEVI state plan. So that's really exciting that there's so much public outreach happening. That's an important part of the plan development. Next slide, please. So just a quick disclaimer, there is an open rulemaking right now. And so just a disclaimer here that I'm not taking any comments on that rulemaking. There is an official mechanism for that. So we can move to the next slide, please. So as Karen mentioned, I'm with the Joint Office of Energy and Transportation. I come from the National Renewable Energy Lab, but I'm on detail to the Joint Office for the next year or so. And I'm serving as our interim team lead for stakeholder engagement. Next slide, please. So the Joint Office was established in the bipartisan infrastructure law to address areas of joint interest between the Departments of Energy and Transportation. We've got 9 major areas of emphasis, but we've been focused on for the last 6 months or so is technical assistance related to the development of state plans for the National Electric Vehicle Infrastructure Formula Program. So we've been meeting with Arizona and 49 other states plus Puerto Rico and the District of Columbia to help states process the guidance that was issued as part of the NEVI formula program and develop state plans. And as John mentioned, those plans are due August 1st, and so we'll be pretty quickly here moving into the implementation phase. But we've got some other areas of emphasis that we'll be focused on over the coming 5 years or so, looking at how, as this infrastructure gets rolled out, what sort of data is collected that can help us understand where future investments can be made, thinking about workforce development and what sort of training and certification programs may be necessary, understanding how states and DOTs can work more effectively with utilities to break down some of the barriers to deploying infrastructure in rural areas, that sort of thing. So lots of things to think about in the coming years. Next slide, please. So the Joint Office, again, brings together the Department of Energy and the Department of Transportation. And our mission is to accelerate an electrified transportation system that is affordable, convenient, equitable, reliable, and safe. So we really want to inspire confidence in electric vehicle drivers so that we can create a future where everyone can ride and drive electric. Next slide, please. So our immediate term priority right now is the National Electric Vehicle Infrastructure Formula Program. So that's when John talked about how Arizona is developing its state plan. This is to access the $5 billion in federal funding that goes to the states to build out a national EV charging network. I think John mentioned Arizona has about $72 million over the next 5 years to build out that infrastructure. But this is one of the things that we've been focused on here in the near term. Later this year, we'll be rolling out the National Electric Vehicle Infrastructure Discretionary Grant Program. So that's another $2.5 billion in community grants for EV charging, as well as hydrogen, natural gas, and propane fueling infrastructure. Half of that will be focused on corridors, and the other half will be focused on community charging. And then we also have technical assistance available through the Joint Office for the Department of Transportation's Low No Emission Grants Program for transit, as well as the EPA's Clean School Bus Program. Next slide, please. So February 10th was when initial guidance came out, as well as a call for round 6 alternative fuel corridor designations. So the initial build out of charging infrastructure with respect to the NEVI formula program is focused on designated alternative fuel corridors. And once corridors are fully built out, states will have the option to invest those NEVI dollars in additional public roadways. In June, there were the 180-day minimum standards that were published as part of the notice of proposed rulemaking. So that disclaimer in the beginning, there is an open rulemaking with respect to those proposed minimum standards. And then we also accepted round 6 nominations. So the announcement for round 6 nominations should be coming out shortly, and that'll provide additional information on alternative fuel corridors that have been designated throughout the United States. I expect we'll have the majority of the interstate highway system covered, as well as corridors in all 50 states. State plans are due August 1st, so we're quickly approaching that deadline, and then those plans will be reviewed by the Joint Office and the Federal Highways Administration and approved by September 30th. Next slide, please. So the 90-day guidance that was issued in February 10th really sets the foundation for what's expected for the build out of the National Electric Vehicle Charging Network. It has information on funding features, the expectations for states to develop state EV infrastructure deployment plans, some project eligibility information and how the program's administered, and then also some of the technical assistance tools that are available through Federal Highways, DOE, DOT, and the Joint Office. Next slide, please. So some key things with respect to the National Electric Vehicle Infrastructure Formula Program is that, again, we're looking to inspire confidence in EV drivers so that drivers know that they can get where they need to go and get the charge they need to do so. So a keystone piece of this is infrastructure installed along alternative fuel corridors that is every 50 miles and then within 1 travel mile of the highway, unless a discretionary exception has been granted. So we do have a mechanism for that. And then these are high power stations. So the EV infrastructure includes at least 450 kilowatt DC fast chargers with CCS ports. And those stations need to be capable of simultaneously charging 4 EVs at the same time at that 150 kilowatt level. So this means total station power capability at or above 600 kilowatts. Next slide, please. And then the funds that are available to the states can be applied to some of the things that you see here. So clearly the acquisition or installation of electric vehicle charging infrastructure, operating assistance. There's some costs that are allocable to operating and maintaining electric vehicle charging so that it is functional and meets the needs of drivers for at least 5 years. Development phase activities, so as states are putting together their plans or doing analysis to understand where infrastructure should go, that sort of thing is covered. And then things like on-premises signs, data sharing, traffic control devices, and then mapping and analysis activities. Next slide, please. So the draft standards and FAQs were published on June 9th. So there were frequently asked questions that really honed in on some of the common questions that we received from states throughout our technical assistance, things like eligible costs, guidance for including disadvantaged communities in planning and deployment, as well as the exception requests that I mentioned to deviate from that 50-mile between stations or 1 mile from the highway requirement. And then in the NPRM, that's the proposed minimum standards. There's information on the connector expectations, communications protocols, data reporting requirements, uptime expectations, all of that. And so that's currently open for public comment. And you can review the notice of proposed rulemaking on driveelectric.gov, and then you can get a link there to the NPRM on that's posted on regulations.gov where you can make comments. Next slide, please. So just wanted to, again, highlight that the FAQs that are posted on driveelectric.gov and made available through the Federal Highways Administration really reflects the engagement that we've had with states to address some of the questions that came up. The top themes from conversation were consolidated into an FAQ, and the FAQs are really intended to provide some clarity to states as they develop their plans, as well as many of you and other stakeholders who are interested in the program. And again, you can find all of these, the 90-day guidance, the state plan template, the exception template, the notice of proposed rulemaking, and the FAQ on driveelectric.gov. Next slide, please. So the FAQs span the following topics. There are some general questions about submission and approval timelines, some of the frequently asked questions about first-year plans, and one of the things that's noteworthy here is that the first-year plan is good for FY22 and FY23 dollars. So the first 2 years of funding will be made available to states once their year one plans are certified. And then there's additional information on eligible expenditures, additional guidance on operating and maintenance of charging infrastructure, utility planning and public engagement. Equity, of course, is a major emphasis of the program. And there's some details there on some of the things to think about with respect to engaging communities as part of state plan development process. And then, of course, information on permitting and environmental review and technical assistance. Next slide, please. So as I mentioned, there is an exception process for the distance between stations and the deviation from distance from highway corridors. So states can submit exception requests on a case-by-case basis to the Federal Highways Administration and the Joint Office, and they'll be considered with for reasons related to grid capacity, geography, equity, and extraordinary cost. Next slide, please. So here you can find how to make comment on the notice of proposed rulemaking. You can submit comments online, via mail, or hand delivery. And comments are due by August 22nd. Next slide, please. So the goal really is to build out a national network. So we're thinking broadly about how do we connect regions. We've convened states in regional office hours to connect with neighboring states. So Arizona has participated in many of those conversations to think about what's happening in New Mexico and Utah and Colorado and Nevada and California. So lots of great collaboration beginning there. Of course, in year one, as is expected, states are primarily focused on the build out of infrastructure within the state boundaries, but we're beginning to see collaboration regionally across the country as states think about connecting EV drivers so that they can traverse the country with confidence. Next slide, please. So again, build out is focused on designated alternative fuel corridors. You can find these again on driveelectric.gov or on the Federal Highways alternative fuel corridor site. And the round 6 corridors will be announced shortly. And so you'll see this map fill out even a little bit more based on the nominations that have been received by states. Next slide, please. So one of the things that we really like to emphasize is that the Joint Office is new, but we recognize that there's been a lot of great work in the transportation electrification space for many, many years. So I think in the last 6 months, we've had meetings with close to 62 different stakeholder organizations. We've presented about 60 times as well to groups like this and others, really honing in on the idea that there are many experts out there that have a lot to contribute to building out a national network that can meet the needs of EV drivers. So we embrace this idea of a big tent, and we're really working with our stakeholders to make sure that states and others have access to the best resources as they begin to invest in charging infrastructure through the NEVI formula program. Next slide, please. We've had 52 meetings, one-on-one meetings with states. So we've met with every single state, as well as Puerto Rico and the District of Columbia. And by and large, the engagement with states has been spectacular. We're really excited to see the state plans come in and be submitted on August 1st. Those will be posted publicly eventually, and the Joint Office will be issuing a report based on some of the common themes that emerge from the state plans. Next slide, please. And then equity, of course, as I mentioned, is a really significant portion. We want to make sure, again, that anyone who wants to can ride and drive electric. So there are resources on driveelectric.gov. With respect to equity, it's in the proposed minimum standards as well as the FAQ. We've done a number of webinars on equity and Justice 40. And then there's a combined map that has been developed that brings together disadvantaged community demographic information from DOE and DOT, and that's posted on driveelectric.gov as well, so you can see where some of the disadvantaged communities are in the United States and think about ways to ensure that the benefits do flow to those communities, and that those communities have a voice in the build out of the national electric vehicle charging network. So John mentioned how Arizona is engaging with communities throughout Arizona to understand their needs and use that to inform the state planning process. And so this is another keystone piece of the NEVI formula program. Next slide, please. So again, for any of the resources that I mentioned, you can access those on driveelectric.gov. That's the online home of the Joint Office. You can find the guidance, the state plan template, technical assistance, and all that stuff. And we're going to continue to update this as the program evolves and as we move into the implementation phase of the build out of the network. Next slide, please. So thanks so much, everyone, and really appreciate being here today. And again, you can reach out to us at driveelectric.gov. We've got a contact form there, and we can answer any questions that you have and connect you with resources as we move forward. So thank you so much.
Thank you, Steve, for that really engaging and in-depth PowerPoint slide. Thank you so much. We really appreciate it. So now, for the sake of time, we are going to go ahead and move forward with our next panel. But just right before then, just a couple of quick announcements. I see a couple of questions in the chat. We will be making all of these slides available to everyone after the fact, and we are also recording this presentation, so you'll have access to that as well. So thank you very much for the question. So now, all right, I'd like to go ahead, and now that we just had an overview of some of the state planning process, now we have a panel on connecting federal stimulus projects to state and utility transportation electrification plans. So we have a full suite of organizations here to discuss this topic. So now I'd like to invite each of the speakers that are on the slide now to come on off mute and turn on their videos if they like to introduce themselves. And now I'd like to kick it over to Nick Nigro, who's the founder of Atlas Public Policy and also our moderator for this panel. Nick, please take it away.
Thanks so much, Karen. It's really great to be here. I will say I was at the first one of these a few years ago in person. So it's just a little hint that I would love to head back out to Arizona again sometime next year. If you all want to do this in person, that would be great. But in the meantime, we'll all sit on these Zooms and videos and chat with each other and have a really great discussion. I really appreciate the setup we got from Steve. and the gentleman from Arizona DOT, because it really sets the stage for this conversation about how we connect the dots on all the money and activity that's going to come out of Washington, D.C., where I sit here at Atlas Public Policy, and from the government to you all in Arizona, and how we can connect those dots together with what's already happening in the states. I'm joined by a wonderful group of panelists. Some of them have some slides they're going to run through, and others will just introduce themselves. I'm gonna let each panelist tell the audience a little bit about their background when they get to go, and we're gonna jump right into it. And so I'd like to begin with Thor Anderson, who's from Arizona DOT. Thor?
Thank you, Nick. Yes, again, I'm Thor Anderson. I work for Arizona DOT's Multimodal Planning Division. I'm the Performance and Asset Manager, and I am the project manager on our EV infrastructure deployment plan. One of the big benefits of this plan is it will foster adoption of EVs because it's going to close gaps in our current system, and that's going to reduce range anxiety. So that is a big barrier in my perception of EV adoption. Director Halakowski mentioned that we are doing a pretty heavy lift on public involvement, considering we have such a short time frame to get this plan done. And one of the key elements that we're looking for input on is potential new alternative fuel corridors. Right now, our alternative fuel corridors are our interstates, but clearly Arizona is a big state, and there's a lot of other potential routes that would benefit from additional EV fast charging infrastructure. So we are looking for input. We will have our public meeting on June 14th, as Director Halakowski mentioned, and we're looking forward to hearing from a lot of different people. We have our website. We've been meeting one-on-one with various groups, and we're getting a lot of great feedback. So thank you for having me today, and I look forward to the discussion.
Great, thanks a lot, Thor. We're going to turn it over now to Ed from FHWA.
Right, thank you. Good morning. It is my pleasure to be part of the panel this morning. My name is Ed Stillings, and I am the Senior Transportation Planner with Federal Highway Administration Arizona Division, and we're based in Phoenix. I work closely with ADOT, our metropolitan planning organizations, and the rural councils of government on all transportation planning related activities. I am also the local point of contact for alternative fuel corridors and the National Electric Vehicle Infrastructure Program. I did want to take a moment to welcome everyone to this forum on behalf of Federal Highway Administration. Our Deputy Division Administrator, Anthony Sarhan, was originally on the welcoming panel, but he lost his voice. And so he was unable to participate in the welcome this morning, but he is attending the session and is available in the chat. FHWA has been involved in this topic for quite some time now, with our involvement in the designation of alternative fuel corridors since 2016. What has changed for us is the enactment of the bipartisan infrastructure law on November 15th of 2021, which included the National Electric Vehicle Infrastructure element. This act makes the most transformative investment in EV charging in U.S. history that will put us on a path to a nationwide network of 500,000 EV chargers that ensures a convenient, reliable, affordable, and equitable charging experience for all users. While we have been involved in alternative fuel corridor designations in the past, this new highway bill has brought program funding, which makes for exciting times as we look to implement this program nationwide. I have a couple slides that look similar. Since we do work very closely with the joint office, we corroborate and do a lot of presentations, sometimes joint, sometimes individual. So it's to our best interest to have the same information. So on the slide, you can see that we're on a very condensed schedule to fast track implementation of the new programs. A lot has happened in a very short period of time. Started with the issuance of the NEVI formula program guidance and the call for round 6 nominations of the alternative fuel corridor on February 10th. Round 6 nominations were due by May 13th, and ADOT submitted that information prior to the deadline. And as Diane mentioned in the chat, FHWA is currently reviewing the nominations. We expect to hear something on that in the near future. FHWA previously conducted 5 rounds of nominations starting in 2016 and has approved a network of corridor ready or corridor pending, which has allowed states to slowly expand their alternative fuel corridor networks. As you've heard from Steve, there was a notice of proposed rulemaking issued June 9th with the proposed regulations for minimum standards and requirements for the NEVI formula program. And comments are due to the Federal Register docket no later than August 22nd. In order for states to be able to spend the NEVI formula program funds, they have to complete and submit a state EV deployment plan by August 1st to the joint office. And Director Halakowski and Thor Anderson from ADOT have covered this in depth. So the next step will be, once we get that plan submitted, FHWA will be part of the review and will approve the plans or request changes no later than September 30th of this year. Once that plan is approved, then the NEVI formula program funds are available for ADOT to begin to expend. Next slide, please. Another element of the bill is the discretionary grant program for charging and fueling infrastructure, which has been split into 2 distinct grant programs. Steve covered this some. The first piece is to allocate to projects supporting the alternative fuel corridor designations once the deployment plan, well, actually, since the corridor designations have been approved, not the deployment plan. The other allocation is likely of greater interest to participants on this webinar, since the community charging grant program will be a nationwide call for projects to deploy charging infrastructure in communities. And eligible applicants include local governments and Indian tribes. It is my understanding that the current notice of funding opportunity for these grant programs will be issued jointly in the fall of this year. I will close at this point and allow the other panelists to provide overviews. Thank you.
Thanks a lot, Ed. We're going to turn it over now to Eric from the Maricopa Association of Governments.
Thank you, Nick. Thank you for the invitation to participate in this program. The Maricopa Association of Governments is a designated metropolitan planning organization for the region. In that context, we're charged with doing the long-range transportation planning for the region. Last year, we completed our new long-range plan, which goes out to 2050. And if you think about the changes in the fleet that are anticipated over the next 30 years, it's pretty dynamic, to say the least. And so we are committed to doing whatever we can do to encourage more electrification of the fleet sooner than it would otherwise. As part of that effort, we're just launching a regional electrification roadmap project. We're in the consultant selection process right now. The roadmap is designed to produce a range of recommendations and strategies to enhance electrification readiness in the region, define the planning activities that are necessary, importantly, define roles and responsibilities, and an enhanced understanding of the opportunities and challenges we face. Mapping of the EV ecosystem will be an important component of the roadmap. We try to get away from the fact that there's a lot of money on the table, and it's incumbent upon us to have a plan in place. Obviously, we're a planning agency, so that fits nicely with our overall mission. But we want to make sure that we understand kind of where all the different components are headed on that. And we've had to date a number of policy committee discussions about the future of EV charging and the role that MAG can play in that. There's a lot of aspects of electrification that have to be addressed, and a lot of uncertainty. I think Director Holakowski hit on a lot of those. Charging technology is advancing very, very quickly, and what we don't want to do is have a bunch of charging stations out there that can't be upgraded or are in the short term obsolete. That just doesn't make a lot of sense. So we really do have to understand kind of where the technology is headed on that. MAG does have an emerging technology program that we're actually implementing pilot programs on various and sundry new technologies, everything from dynamic signal systems to smart lighting systems, pedestrian detection systems, those sorts of things too. So I think we're in a good position to understand kind of where the technology is headed. There are other issues, though: availability of rare earth minerals for battery production, battery recycling. Some of our policymakers are concerned about what do you do when the batteries reach their end of their useful life. Electric grid capacity, and anxious to hear from our utility providers today, both in terms of the grid capacity and reliability, equity. A number of speakers have already talked about the need to make sure that the advantages of electrification reach all aspects of our community. Costs, there are a lot of other issues. I would like to kind of outline three areas that I think are key to the overall success of any kind of electrification program. One, I mentioned technology, battery range and costs. It wasn't too many years ago that the range was less than 100 miles. We're now seeing ranges that are typically north of 300 miles and some as high as 500 miles, and that's increasing. The charging technologies in terms of the cost, speed, and availability are changing very, very quickly. And so I think Director Holakowski made the point that these charging stations have to have the ability to be upgraded. Short versus longer term deployment strategies. A lot of talk about these corridors, charging corridors, very important for the short term. Longer term, they may not be as important as other charging alternatives, and as battery technology becomes better. One of the major points: maintenance. Who's going to maintain these charging stations? A recent study out of the Bay Area indicated 25% of the chargers were inoperable. And so talk about frustration. You pull into a charging station, it doesn't work. That's a big issue. So we do have to understand kind of how the network is going to be maintained. The second big issue area, I think, is the public versus private sector roles and responsibilities. Obviously, historically, the private sector has played a big role in the rollout of gasoline stations, as an example, historically. What is the role of the public sector versus private sector, especially as we move out of this short term, which I think is a short term, providing incentives for electrification investments? Is that going to continue, or kind of what point does it become electrification becomes mainstream, and the kind of incentives that are in place today might not be necessary? The last big issue area that we've had a lot of policy discussions is transportation funding. The gas tax today represents about half of the dedicated transportation funding that's available in the state of Arizona. It represents, the gas tax nationally represents 84% of the funding for the National Highway Trust Fund. And so there has to be some thought and implementation of alternative ways to pay for transportation. No matter kind of what your fuel source is for your vehicle, if you're using the roadway, we're going to have to maintain those roads in the future too. So we are going to have to look very quickly, I think, in implementing alternatives to the traditional gas tax structure we have in the United States. So thank you very much. Look forward to hearing the others. Thank you.
Nick, I think you were on mute. I believe I'm next.
Apologies. Yep.
That's all right.
So thanks a lot, Eric, for doing that great, raising those important issues that we're going to have to take on in the near future. We're now going to turn it over to Tony from the utility. Some of the folks in the audience might not know that the two largest investors so far in charging infrastructure have been the electric utility industry and the government. The federal investment that we've been talking about, the NEVI program, is the single largest investment, but there are hundreds of millions and billions, in fact, of dollars from electric utilities going into infrastructure today. So they're an equal partner, in my opinion, to what government is doing right now in infrastructure. So looking forward to hear remarks from Tony. Go ahead.
Thank you, Nick, for that great introduction. Hi, everybody. My name is Tony Perez. I'm a Senior Energy Innovation Analyst with Arizona Public Service. My focus is on product development and strategy in transportation electrification to support APS's portfolio of EV programs. So just at the top, a little bit about APS. We've been serving Arizona since 1886. We are an investor-owned public service company regulated by the Arizona Corporation Commission, or the ACC. We have a service territory that just spans 34,000 square miles, operating in 11 counties. We are serving nearly 1.3 million homes and businesses in Arizona, and we have a goal to deliver 100% clean, carbon-free electricity by 2050. Next slide, please. I'd also like to take some time to talk a little bit about transportation electrification at APS in terms of our strategy and programs. First and foremost, APS is committed to enabling EV adoption with a focus on customer experience, grid integration, and equity. We actually worked diligently over the last couple of years to develop a statewide TE plan that was ordered by the Arizona Corporation Commission. And we worked with a number of stakeholders that are also present on this call. As part of that plan, APS adopted a light-duty electric vehicle goal for its service territory, which is currently 450,000 light-duty electric vehicles by 2030. So in terms of the programs that we offer, they're really sort of on the infrastructure side as well as sort of on the demand management side. So from the infrastructure standpoint, we have a Take Charge program for level 2 commercial charging, where APS will support commercial customers that are eligible for the program with installing level 2 chargers. On the DC fast charging side, we recently announced a partnership with Electrify America, whereby we will be deploying DC fast charging in charging deserts in cities and towns throughout our service territory that don't currently have fast charging. On the EV demand management pilot side, or demand management charging side, we have a number of different programs, one of them including analysis and data collection to better understand residential EV charging, residential EV rebate for installing a level 2 charger. We also, which is pending, have a fleet advisory services sort of on deck in order to help accelerate the fleet electrification for our customers that are interested. Of course, we are engaged in broad-based education and outreach as part of that plan as well, and hope to engage with as many stakeholders as possible to sort of share what the utility is doing in this space and encourage collaboration. Just a quick mention on EV rates. We have a commercial DC fast charging pilot rate rider, which is relatively new, and that rate rider can be taken advantage of for those that are installing public-facing DC fast chargers. And it features a demand charge discount that phases out over time, which we think is going to be a great rate to help quickly deploy more EV fast chargers. Also pending with the commission are another level 1 and level 2 commercial EV charging rate for customers to incentivize charging during midday. And we also are pending approval of our residential super off-peak rate, which encourages charging overnight. APS is also dedicated to electrifying its own fleet, and we have a stated goal in that area as well. We're making some considerable progress to meet the stretch goal of 100% carbon-free fleet by 2050. So that is my introduction. There is a lot of exciting things happening in this space, and I'm happy to be here. So thanks for having me. I look forward to the discussion.
Thanks a lot, Tony. Now we're going to close our intros with Mark from SRP.
Hey, good morning, everybody. Thank you for having me. I'm glad to be here. I'll keep this pretty brief so that we can get really, I think, to the substantive part of this session, which is the questions and some of the conversation that we'll all have with each other. But I'm Mark Campbell. I manage the Strategic Partnership Development Group at SRP. It's a newly created group, but for the past 7.5 years, I have managed our Sustainability Policy and Programs Department, which had responsibility for, among other things, SRP's electric vehicle strategy. And I'm going to take a slightly different approach than Tony, because we, like APS, we do have a number of different customer programs. But our approach is a little bit different to what we're trying to do out in the community to unlock the potential and all of the benefits of electric vehicles. At a high level, SRP has an electric vehicle goal that was established as part of our 2019 revision to the 2035 sustainability goals to enable 500,000 electric vehicles in our service territory by 2035, with 90% of those vehicles on managed charging programs. And so there's a lot of opportunity for us to get out and work with other folks and really shape how this is done. But I think the key question is, for us, is how do we do that? How do we unlock all of that potential? Because we only have such a small component of it. So, transportation is not our business model. Selling electrons and in our case, managing water supplies is our business model. And so how do we leverage what we do really well in building those external partnerships to really magnify the efforts? And so one way that we've really started to think about this is through the Transportation Electrification Activator. And I won't spend any time really getting into where this came about, but the idea, the concept was really born between SRP and our external consultant, the Anthesis Group, specifically John Heckman. And how do we go out and really work with the community to leverage those great opportunities? And so what we really wanted to do, and what we had noticed, is that there's frankly a lot of great efforts that have been done in the transportation electrification world in the past decade or so, but a lot of those efforts have been disparate. They haven't been united. And what we thought is that we could really leverage that opportunity to work collectively and develop a larger regional vision of how do we start to get there. And so as we noodled on that, we thought that really conceptually the way to do it was to build a coalition of organizations that are committed to transportation electrification. And what you see here are really our originally founding members of this organization. And I'm going to kind of come back here in a minute to where we are currently. But these are folks that were committed to partnering together to pursue public goals and a joint vision. And quickly, before I move off this slide, I'm going to apologize to Eric Carlin and anybody else from Shell Recharge that's on the call. I did not catch the fact that I've got your old logo on this slide. So Green Lots is now Shell Recharge, so I apologize, and I'll make that change in the future, Eric. But next slide, please. So really, the underpinnings to the activator is really pretty simple. We just want to get things done. And I've already kind of hit upon that we've noticed that there are a lot of organizations that were out there doing work. Tony and I used to work together, and Tony and I a few years ago noticed that a lot of the organizations would come together at conferences. We would talk about what each organization was doing independently, but there didn't seem to be that larger vision for how do we coalesce around working together to magnify that impact. And that's really what we wanted to do here, was to build this coalition of practitioners and supporters focused on accelerating electrification of the transportation sector in Arizona and really unlocking all of the benefits that I think everybody before me has mentioned. Air quality, social justice, social equity. How do we start to really build that united front on that? And so our thought process is that through this coordinated action, we can actually get things done and transform the regional approach in a way that we can't do individually. Next slide, please. And so the approach to this, and I'm not going to really kind of hit upon all of this, but was really to start to work together, set public goals, and develop a set of action plans toward that common pursuit. Ultimately, what we would like to see is this activator expanded across the state, kind of build it out regionally. We've got those good set of foundational partners, but how do we start to get APS, TEP, and other similar organizations into this coalition to kind of further that united vision, and then start to think about additional organizations that want to see the same sorts of outcomes that we all do. And through this approach, we think that we've got a really good opportunity to provide comment to the Department of Transportation on what they're doing with some of the NEVI funding, where they're going to go with the state plan on that. But I think to kind of set the stage for where we're going to go, Nick, with some of the discussion here is how do we start to position this group to be a stronger front for bringing in some of that federal stimulus funding into the state of Arizona. And so with that, I'm going to leave I'm not going to go to my last slide. I think I'll go ahead and stop there, and maybe that's a good way to segue into the conversation. So thanks for having me today.
And thanks a lot, Mark. Yeah, there is quite a lot of competitive grant money coming out of the federal infrastructure law as well. So the NEVI program is dedicated funding, but there's $2.5 billion, 50% of that NEVI program funding that's discretionary. And so looking competitive is going to be important there. So let's jump into the conversation now. I'd love for both Tony and Mark to kind of help connect us to this federal program now and starting with the utilities. So I mentioned earlier the utilities nationwide in the aggregate are the second largest investor right now in EV infrastructure, behind only the federal government, which is a new thing. So up until the infrastructure law, the utilities were the single largest investor in infrastructure around the country. And so I'd love to hear, both Tony and Mark, your perspectives on how are you going to connect to that law? How does this opportunity presented by the law enhance your own TE programs? Why don't we start with Tony?
Thank you, Nick. So I think by and large, our strategy here is to find out ways how, through our existing strategies and programs, we can complement the federal programs and the funding that is potentially coming to the state of Arizona or is coming to the state of Arizona through the NEVI program. So to start off, we've spent a considerable time understanding what exactly is part of the law, and we've partnered with some agencies to help communicate to our customers what's actually in the law and what opportunities are available to them. And that includes, municipalities and a number of other commercial customers as well. Another example is with the Clean School Bus Program. We've partnered with our key account managers who represent schools to see if we can provide an additional layer of communication and support to eligible schools that might be interested in bus electrification. And so we're kind of leveraging our existing communication channels to at least get the word out about what opportunities are out there. But beyond that, with the funding that is coming to the state, it sort of raised some questions about, the way our current portfolio of EV programs is performing and the types of investments that we're making. So we do recognize at the top that when it comes to EV charging infrastructure, there are a number of different use cases and needs to help satisfy what is needed for an electric transportation future. And it's not going to be sort of one organization like a third-party charging service provider that's going to build an EV charging station at every location for every person with an EV, right? So with that, we recognize that every sort of player in this space has a certain level of priorities and requirements regarding prudency in their investments in this infrastructure. And so we're taking all of that and in addition to our experience and what we're hearing from customers to really understand how we can design an EV portfolio for the future that really does complement the opportunities that we're seeing sort of in the state and synergizes with the projects that are currently moving forward with regard to the EV charging infrastructure.
Mark.
Well, now you know why I introduced this talk with the Transportation Electrification Activator, because that's really the way that we think the conversation needs to be framed. You mentioned really, Nick, that this notion of competition, that's what we see happening nationally for really, frankly, there's a lot of money, but it's limited amount of money. And I think there's a lot of work that needs to be done. And there's been, I think, a general recognition that outside of the TEA until recently, there hasn't been a lot of coordination. And I hinted at, I mentioned that a little bit in my introduction, that there have been a lot of disparate, efforts underway, but that, there's this sense that we have to continue to demonstrate coordination to maximize the flow of federal dollars into our region. And so this is really, when I talk about the activator, that's really our approach, is that we think that we can have a lot stronger grant application by working together. And that, what we're really looking at right now is targeting the charging and an alternative infrastructure grant program, although there could be some other buckets there as well as we get a little bit deeper into the analysis. But we think that is a good first pass at some of this. Although we'll need to have I think, a better understanding of some of the technical requirements when that guidance comes out in November, and we'll do a little bit more evaluation. But we want to position Arizona to be competitive for accessing that money. SRP, like APS, has a number of customer programs that we have put out there. We have developed tools. We have a preferred siting tool to help some of our charging companies and other interested folks understand where are good locations on the grid from a capacity perspective, and with a number of different layers to really start to install some of that equipment. But we're trying to transition our current model here. And so our approach right now has been a make-ready infrastructure approach through those customer programs. And you can go all the way from the make-ready infrastructure to utility-owned charging stations. And I'm not sure that SRP is ready to go to that end of the spectrum, but this is a way to start to move us down that pathway a little bit and work in a more coordinated fashion.
So I'd like to hear next from Thor and Ed, or excuse me, Thor and Eric, before I ask Ed to give these folks some advice. But why don't we start with Thor and then go to Ed about where you see the utility sitting in this space, not just for the competitive programs that have been mentioned a few times, but also NEVI and how you see some of the guaranteed funding flowing through DOT, how the utility might be involved in that. Thor?
Thank you. Yeah, I think it's important. Some utilities are interested in developing the infrastructure themselves, but other utilities, while they may not develop the infrastructure, are interested in fostering the development of the infrastructure, and they have programs within their utility where they could help with the match. There is a match involved in this funding, which actually makes the funding much greater for Arizona. That could bring that 76 million or so up to around 95 million. So there's opportunities there. Clearly, we want to coordinate with the utilities in terms of infrastructure and making sure that the infrastructure is available to install stations, particularly in disadvantaged communities and other rural areas. So I think the utilities are going to play a really important role in our plan and in the implementation of the NEVI program in Arizona.
Right on. Before I go to Eric, just quick follow-up with Tony and Mark to Thor's point about cost share and match. Have you all established a position on that at this point, or is that something you're still talking about internally? Tony?
Yeah, we are aware, and it's something that we're currently discussing internally about what can be done in that space. But we don't have any sort of official public.
You don't want to break news today?
No.
Okay, cool. Mark?
Well, I'll probably take the same conservative approach as Tony. That's how utilities are. I think there is an awareness, Nick. I'm not quite sure what that looks like yet, and hence really this need for organization. Let's see what sort of money we get coming into the state and how we can be a part of maximizing that.
Mm-hmm. Okay, Eric, back to you.
Yeah, thank you. So, the corridor charging that ADOT's really focused on right now, we're more interested in the community charging aspect and developing this regional plan. And I think what I think is really important that as we propose or apply for these grants, that we show a unified front. And I think having the private sector represented by the utilities squarely as part of our process, explicitly as part of that process, I think gives us a leg up, if you will, in the competition for these limited funds. The other thing I would mention that, we're working on the extension of our dedicated sales tax here in Maricopa County for transportation. And as part of that, we can leverage some of those funds in the future, either in terms of matching funds or being creative in how those funds are applied for programs like this. And so we built some flexibility in the program moving forward that we didn't have in the past. And so I think there might be an ability to use some of our sales tax monies in the future too, to provide additional leverage in some of these proposals moving forward too.
That's really cool, Eric. I don't know if I've heard that one yet, because I know some other jurisdictions have dedicated sales tax for this. Most of the time I hear that going to transit and such. So Ed, do you get some advice for them about how they can be more competitive?
Honestly,
Yeah.
I think, as we start building these charging stations, a power source obviously is an important element, and I think the utilities need to be part of that conversation. And
Mhm.
I think working closely with Thor and ADOT is the way to go. It's going to be challenging, um, and the $5 billion. It sounds like a lot of money, right? But as you've heard, Arizona's share is like 76.5 million. So it chops down pretty quick when you pass it around. So we have to be very, forward thinking on how we can spread that $76.5 million out and across the board, and trying to see what kind of opportunities we might have to do some kind of matching and cost sharing with utilities, and so I think that's probably my thoughts on it, and um, we'll go forward from there.
Right on. Ed, we got about 18 minutes left before I got to hand it back to Karen. So I want to stick with you for the next question about Federal Highway's role. I think you had the slide that said, FHWA has been involved in alt fuels for quite some time. Not so much giving out money in general as we are now getting into the DOTs. And so I wonder, in general, looking back, and especially with regards to electric vehicle infrastructure, it's been from a state perspective, it's been the energy offices, the air agency offices who've been getting funding through things like the Volkswagen settlement or other state or federal programs. Now it's the DOTs getting a good amount of money. So I'm wondering if you could ex expand a little bit more about how you see FHWA's role both now and in the near future. I've heard some DOTs say that we want this kind of program to be part of our core operations moving forward. We don't want this to just be a one-time thing. So tell us a little bit about the perspective from the federal government on that.
Sure. Obviously, uh, some of our roles we've been pretty involved with, as far as the corridor designations. It's critical that, that you don't want the corridor to end at the state line, right?
Mm-hmm.
So if you're traveling across the country and you go from one state to the next, you expect to have, the ability to get to charge your vehicles. So there's been a lot of that kind of collaboration where we're talking between states, to make sure that we're not just leaving, just dropping the corridor at the end of the state. And then also the effort with standards, that's very important. We need to ensure that if you buy your car in Arizona and you go to another state, that your charger will work when you hook up. So that's another role that we've been involved in, is some of the standards. And so those are the sort of things that we've been involved in, and I think going forward, it's whatever may come up, we're just going to have to be quick on our feet, I think, as we identify maybe new challenges or, but honestly, the federal funds, I think that in some ways it's honestly seed money. That 76 million is just not gonna, it's not gonna cover it all. So I think
Mm-hmm.
it's going to be key that we get the infrastructure going, and then hopefully it'll kind of start to build on itself as we go forward.
So I'd like to turn that question back to you now about, where's ADOT at when it comes to your role, not just now, but moving forward.
Well, we're going to have an important role because not only does ADOT prepare the plan, but we're going to be involved in the implementation of the plan and the follow through on the monitoring, on reporting, and making sure that this infrastructure stays in place. We're really focused on trying to develop a strategy that's going to allow for future proofing. We're trying to focus on a strategy that ensures that stations will be reliable into the future and ensures that we don't have stranded assets in the future. So we're thinking a lot about these issues, but we recognize that this is a long-term effort and we'll be involved in it over the long term.
Eric, Mark, Tony, you all have anything to add on this one?
No, I think the point again about the reliability and making sure that these chargers are maintained. I think Thor hit on that, and others have this morning also.
So there was a question from the audience about on that last point that you just made, Eric, that I think is emerging as a really important one, and that's reliability. Eric, I think you mentioned the Berkeley study, which found some share of EV stations to be inaccessible. I think anyone who has an EV has experienced that as well. This is a new industry, there's a new technology. A lot of these companies are quite small. They don't necessarily have that experience of achieving telecom like 4 nines reliability. And so, we need to ensure, though, that folks who are traveling, particularly in these corridors, they're on travel trips. 30 time is important to them. They're planning these charging stops, and they could be stuck. And so, I'd love to hear. And there is some amount of reliability built into the guidance that's issued from the Joint Office. And so, I wonder if we could talk a little bit about that as well. And maybe there's a specific role for Tony and Mark there in ensuring reliability. Why don't we start with you, Eric, on that one?
Well, I think reliability, I mentioned the grid capacity and reliability of the grid. What happened in Texas hopefully won't happen here in Arizona because we're configured a little bit differently too. So, but I think the reliability of the charging stations, if you pull up to in today's world, to pull up to a gas station and, all the pumps are out of service, doesn't work very well. And same thing if you're in between here and LA and you need to charge and you pull into a rest area with a charger and it doesn't work, what are you going to do? And so, once again, I think it's part of that range anxiety issue too. What happens if something happens and I'm in the middle of nowhere, and it's not like you can call AAA and they bring a gallon gas out to you and you can go on your way. And so there has to be some other alternatives too in terms of emergency response, if you will, fast charging on a truck or something like that AAA can get you back on the road, if you will. Not to give AAA any extraordinary love here, but that's the sort of service I think we need to have in place.
Tony, Mark, you all want to chime in on this one?
Yeah, just a couple of points. So with our existing DC fast charging program, it sort of opened up, a lot of questions that we hadn't previously thought about. And so at least in terms of maintaining some of the infrastructure that we currently have deployed, we have some preventative maintenance contracts in place to help alleviate some of the concerns that users may have. But that's just for the charging stations that are sort of in our program. And I think there's a larger concern across the board about reliability of a network for different reasons. And so we are continuing to monitor that from the standpoint of our own reliability to be able to deliver the power. And so right now, I mean, it's sort of it's a change and a mindset change that we're going through, because historically, as Mark alluded to, transportation hasn't really been sort of a space that we've operated in, but now customer and consumer expectations are changing. We now play a very critical role in moving people and goods. And so I think it's going to be very important for us as utility to start to engage in new conversations with associations or organizations that we have not historically partnered with to ensure that we can help support an interoperable, reliable network in the state.
Yeah, I think those are some really good points. And when we talk about reliability, I mean, there's a couple different ways you can look at it. We're talking about from the charging station perspective, but then there's also the grid. And at the outset of my introduction, I mentioned SRP's electric vehicle goal, which also includes a 90% managed charging element to that. And that's really about reliability. The grid can handle charging those vehicles, but we need to do it at good times of the day. We continue to experience unprecedented growth here in Arizona, and that's going to put a lot of pressure on the sorts of resources that utilities continue to develop and bring in and onto the grid. And so what we would really like to see is our programs through pricing mechanisms and others, so sending out signals to folks that are encouraging those vehicles to charge at the right times of the day. I think right now that the challenge will be if we suddenly were to have 500,000 vehicles in our service territory, everybody wants to go home at the end of the day, turn down their air conditioning and plug their electric vehicles in. That's going to be a challenge for utilities. And so how do we get people to start to think about charging overnight, off peak, during the day when we will start to have more battery storage and excess solar that those electric vehicles can actually utilize? And so we spent a lot of time talking internally about what does that smart charging component actually look like, and how do we start to work with a broader set of stakeholders to ensure that that's really how we grow into this. Another element, and I'll kind of point back to Tony because I did have the good fortune of working with Tony for some time, but it's really this preferred siting tool that we've developed that takes a look at a number of different layers in our service territory to help locate where those charging stations can actually go and be accommodated. And we want to start to market that more to our EVSE partners so that they have an understanding as we start to grow this network out. There are some good places that I think are going to be a little bit more naturally prone to starting off as we start to figure out some of those bigger picture challenges that the utilities have to address.
Yeah, I just have to say, Mark, I appreciate your point about managed charging, how important it is. The expectation is about 90% of folks are going to do their charging at home. So a lot of the energy that's necessary for electric vehicles is going to be in a situation where where people have time essentially to charge. And so managed charging is a good application there. And I couldn't help but think about the weather in Arizona and where you all are at right now, where you're averaging over 100 days a year of 100 plus degrees in Phoenix. I mean, that's remarkable for most of the rest of the country to endure in terms of how much air conditioning y'all need. So definitely need to manage that grid. So why don't we go back to Thor to talk a little bit about the reliability perspective from ADOT and how you all are looking at it from the point of view of the NEVI program and your plan right now that you all are starting to create.
Sure. Well, the NEVI guidelines have a goal of 97% reliability. And I think there's going to be a lot of different components to that. We are going to be looking for companies to install and operate these chargers that have a track record of reliability. That's going to be an important factor in our decision making. We are looking, the NEVI funding can provide operations and maintenance funding that will help stations, particularly in rural areas, make sure that they're getting the proper maintenance. The fact that we do have at least 4 chargers per station means that we are going to have some redundancy in the stations. That's an important factor. If we can upgrade some existing stations, those will already have a track record of reliability that we'll be able to measure. Of course, we'll be working with the utilities once we get our approximate locations identified to make sure that the grid infrastructure is available for reliable operation. So there's a whole variety of things that we will have to assess to be able to ensure that the system that we build out is reliable.
Ed, next one's to you, and then I think Thor, you might want to chime in on this one too. And this, you mentioned it a second ago, just about the owning and operating the equipment. Who's going to actually run this show is going to be very important to the average American, because they're probably, in a lot of cases, they might not be very familiar with that company at all. This might be their first time engaging with them. And so, is there an expectation that the equipment's going to be owned and operated by mom and pop shops, these large third-party charging network providers, utilities? There's lots of different business models out there for charging infrastructure. Ed, maybe start with you from the federal perspective on how that could and might play out, and then we'll go into the Thor, and then maybe Eric, you could also chime in on your thoughts.
Yeah, I'm not sure at the federal level. I'm not really sure what role we might play with that. It's really going to come down to the state. And I know in preliminary conversations that we've been having in meetings, ADOT doesn't want to be the owner and operator of these systems. They'd have to bring in all kinds of new expertise, and so we're just really looking for. I think like what Thor said, we're going to have to find reliable system operators that will be able to keep these stations functioning. And I did just want to toss out on the last question. I think we're going to need some sort of education component to this at some point. Educating electric vehicle owners. Please don't charge your vehicle at 4 p.m., 5 p.m., 6 p.m. Because we do. The grid is limited. So I think there's an education component to this that we're gonna have to tackle as we move forward.
Thor, anything else you want to add on that regarding owning operating? It sounds like Ed's thinking y'all don't want to be the owner operator. I think that's pretty common amongst the DOTs.
Yeah, the model that we're adopting is private match. The private sector would provide the match, and the private sector would own and operate the stations. It could be a combination of big and small businesses. Obviously, you've got to locate the stations, and you're going to want to locate them in an area where the grid is adequate, and it's reasonable to connect those stations up. So that could involve a lot of small business locations where the stations are located. But we are going to be very careful to be looking for companies that have the wherewithal to not only build the stations, but be in it for the long haul in terms of keeping them operating.
Nick, if I can just weigh in real quickly, I think you're starting to see some of that already. I mean, we're talking about what sort of model exists out there yet. Nick, you asked, is it mom and pop shops? Who is it? I think it's a number of different organizations. I can tell you that there are large commercial customers in our service territory that are considering getting in, that already have maybe elsewhere in the nation, but are considering getting into the charging infrastructure game here in Phoenix. And so it's a good opportunity for utilities to really act as an enabler, to help with those synergies between public and private financing. So there's opportunities for us to work with them, utilize the tools that we develop, help maybe co-locate some of those facilities going forward. But I'm seeing it happening already. The conversation is occurring, and a lot of people are thinking about how they can get into this space.
So let's wrap up with the last question about getting involved. I'd like to close that with Thor, but let's go around and give all our speakers here an opportunity to share about how they suggest the audience here get involved with the work that they're doing. Mark, you mentioned your group, and I'd love to hear from others. And so why don't we start with Mark and then go to Tony and Eric.
Well, I'd be really interested in talking to folks that might be interested in learning a little bit more about the Transportation Electrification Activator. I think there's a real opportunity, again, to continue to work together collaboratively to unlock some of these fundings, and I think that funding opportunities, and I think that's going to be a real potential for us if we talk about it a little bit more.
Could you drop like a link or something like that into the chat for folks in case they want to go learn about that more? Tony, go ahead.
I would say participate in the activator.
There you go. Easy.
Yeah, I think just in general, audience members keeping themselves informed on what's happening in the industry, and in particular in the utility sense, sort of where things are in terms of how utilities are engaging. Continue to reach out to us and share your ideas, and keep us informed of what's going on in your space as well, because that's ultimately what's going to help us develop strong programs and partnerships to advance and create the future that we want to see. And just overall, recognize that we're all kind of on the same page in terms of trying to create the future that we are advocating for, or trying to create in terms of robust, interoperable EV charging network, higher EV adoption, competitive state, promoting economic development, and of course, quintessential is ensuring an equitable transition. And so just stay informed is kind of what I want to leave the group with. Thank you.
Awesome. Eric?
Yeah, thanks. So I think participation in our regional electrification roadmap project, which we'll be kicking off here in the next couple of months, I think is a great opportunity for all the stakeholders to become involved. And once again, as I said, many of the issues we talked about today, owning and operating the charging network, for example, need to be talked about and addressed. The role of the private sector, both short term and long term, and those sorts of things. So I'm paying attention to what we're doing on our roadmap project. It's designed to bring all these different groups together, and anxious to get that started. Thank you.
Great. Ed? Ed, anything you want to add there? Go ahead.
No, I can't think of anything that hasn't
Okay.
already been shared.
Okay. Thor, go ahead. Close this out.
Okay, thank you. This plan is on a fast track. Effectively, we got started around June 1st, and we've got a lot of different things going at once. But we did decide to make sure that we're going to do a robust public involvement effort as much as we could do before the initial plan is done. But the initial plan is not the end of it. We will be doing additional public involvement, including in-person public meetings after the plan's done, and we'll continue the public involvement. Right now, we've been meeting with numerous stakeholders. We've met with APS, we've met with SRP, Tucson Electric Power, numerous other stakeholders. In-person one-on-one meetings. We've had a stakeholder meeting. We're going to have a public meeting coming up. We do have our website. We are getting comments every day. I'm working in the evenings helping to respond to those comments, and we are responding to everything. So we're getting a lot of input so far, and we will continue to do that. So I just encourage everybody to keep their eyes open and make comments as much as possible.
Great advice from our panel, and thanks so much for the opportunity to bring us all together, Karen and others organizing this great event. I'll turn it back over to you.
Fantastic. Thank you, Nick, and everyone for participating in our first panel for the forum today. I think there were so many great questions that we weren't able to get to in the chat, but we have been recording and collecting all of those questions, and we'll be sending them to the panelists as a follow-up to this conversation so that we can continue discussing all these really important details. And now on to our next session, since there's been so many questions around, how are we going to ensure that there are electric vehicle charging stations in rural parts of the state, and how are we connecting all parts of the state together to have a truly connected network? Those are a lot of really important questions, and thankfully, I'd like to bring on Alex Clegg with the U.S. Department of Transportation to discuss exactly that issue. So let's go ahead and start the slides. And Alex, you are free to get started when you're ready. Thank you so much.
All right, thank you so much. Hello, everyone. My name is Alex Clegg. I'm with the U.S. Department of Transportation, working in the Routes Initiative. And I'll tell you a bit more about that here in a second. Go into the next slide, please. All right, so a lot of information in this presentation is going to be from a report that we put out, or a toolkit we put out earlier this year called Charging Forward, which is or to kind of consolidate all the information that we have around rural EV charging and put it all in one place in a user-friendly and accessible way. So excited to share more about that. So if we get to the next slide, please, I mentioned at the beginning here that work with the Routes Initiative at DOT. So to give you a quick background on what we do over there, if we go to the next slide. So the Routes Initiative is kind of DOT's umbrella initiative. There we go. For rural transportation policy. Too far there. And we essentially try to take what we know from or what we're hearing in rural communities and spread that message around the department to folks in leadership and folks who are developing different policies and programs and grant programs to make sure that the needs and abilities of rural communities are reflected in those. So, slide carousel right here. But so we kind of break it down to three different kind of categories: engaging rural communities, either through events like this where we get to present, talk about what we have going on, or things that are more interactive, either when we're out in the field, talking to folks, or just when anyone at the department is at a conference or anything, learning more about what rural communities are going through. Taking that information to help harmonize programs across the DOT, including through the Routes Council, which is our statutory leadership body consisting of most of the leadership across the department and the OAs, as well as utilizing a whole of government approach. I'm sure, as all of y'all are aware, this is electrification is a project that is well beyond what the DOT normally does. And so we are working closely with our friends at the Department of Energy, as well as USDA and the Interior, as well as many other different parts of the government to make sure we're all aligned and we all know what each other is doing. So I know rural has come up a lot so far, but to kind of really hammer home the point, the next slide kind of have a couple of statistics about why rural communities especially are going to be beneficiaries of vehicle electrification. It's shouldn't be a surprise to most of the folks here. On average, a rural household is going to drive more than an urban household, and more driving means seeing more of the cost savings of lower fuel costs and lower maintenance. So just on average 10 miles more per day already results in nearly 50% more spending on transportation fuel than in urban households. And then see on the top bullet there, a larger percentage of household expenses that are devoted to transportation. And so as part of the Biden administration's push around this, they've announced their goal to build 500,000 EV charging stations nationwide. As part of that includes this great NEVI funding that we've been talking about first half of this event today. Go to the next slide, please. So back in February, we put out a rural EV infrastructure toolkit called Charging Forward, which we want to do a lot of things and keep it in a very understandable way, with the goal being for rural communities that may know nothing about EVs, or may someone who may already own a Tesla and wants to know more about putting in infrastructure at their business or in their local community, everything they need to know. So what are some of the benefits of EVs? Who are the stakeholders and partners that you need to talk to and work with as you're going about these projects? We have a detailed project planning checklist that provides some information on what to do for project scoping, installation, as well as the operations of the site. We have a compilation of different tools and resources for everything from kind of economic analysis, the more technical electric analysis, as well as some tools for considering equity in planning the location of these chargers. We're trying to consolidate all of those from across the government into one place. And most critically and most excitingly, we combine all of the different federal funding and financing programs and eligibility criteria into one central matrix, central resource, so that you don't have to go across many websites. You can see, sort by who you are and what you're looking for, and see what some of the programs that you could be eligible for are. One thing on that, so as I mentioned, we put this out back in February, which means that it was written mostly last summer and fall. So this toolkit version 1.0 doesn't have a lot of the new programs from the bipartisan infrastructure law, including NEVI. We're working on an update that'll include a lot of the new programs, such as NEVI from the bipartisan infrastructure law, as well as expanded sections on rural transit, rural micromobility, school buses, a whole suite of things. So this Toolkit 1.0 is already great, available for free on our website, and I'll put the link to that in the chat here in a second. But keep your eye out for version 2.0 coming either later this year or early next year. The next slide. I know that this session is on NEVI and that the deadline of August 1st is driving a lot of activity, but there's a lot of money and a lot of different pots coming out of the Department of Transportation right now, largely thanks to the bipartisan infrastructure law. So there's a lot going on this slide, but I wanted to let you know about some of the programs that are currently accepting applications right now, even if they're not nominally a EV program. So stuff like Safe Streets and Roads for All, the Bridge Investment Program, the Reconnecting Communities pilot program, which just got announced, may not on their face be designed for electric vehicle implementation, but they are big, broad programs that strive to do a lot of things, and incorporating electric vehicle infrastructure considerations into grant applications. Something that we've started to see more and more. I think is a really good way for applicants to start thinking about just making electric vehicles part of regular day-to-day transportation planning and accessing more different pots of funds for to expand the EV network. And so one thing to note, these are all discretionary programs. A lot of the funding that US DOT has is distributed by formula to the state DOTs and then down to local governments. So for folks who are on the call, I encourage you to continue working with your state DOT to access some of the formula funding, such as NEVI, as well as some of the other pots that can be used for electric vehicles, such as the new carbon reduction program formula funding, as well as some of the souped up programs such as the STBG and NHPP. FHWA is a really good document that kind of breaks down what some of the different funding pots are that can be used for electric vehicles, and I'll put that in the chat here as well. One of the other things that we're excited about right now, which you can see on the next slide, is some of the new technical assistance programs that we are rolling out. So just last week, we announced the DOT Navigator, which routes tries to consolidate all of the rural resources across the department. The Navigator is trying to do the same kind of one-stop shop approach for technical assistance at the department. So there's a lot of good resources in there, and it's I think a really good resource that we're trying to get out to the field, and we're adding new things to it every day. So make sure you bookmark it and go back there, especially if you're unfamiliar with a lot of the terminology and DOT specific language that you see in grant applications and programs. We have a lot of good plain language resources on there. Another TA program that we are was announced last week, and we hope to release a NOFO for later this year, is the Thriving Communities Initiative, which will provide TA planning capacity building to support broad at a very high level infrastructure projects, as well as economic development opportunities. So keep an eye out for that NOFO. The Rural and Tribal Infrastructure Advancement Program is a new TA program that we was put into the bipartisan infrastructure law, and we hope to have the NOFO for that out later this summer. That's going to be designed largely around accessing TIFIA loans, which is our low interest lending program. There's a lot of overlap between that and some of the other discretionary programs we have. So keep an eye out for that. You may not think that loans from DOT may be right for you. And then, of course, the DOT Bipartisan Infrastructure Law Hub contains a lot of the new programs rolling out through the bipartisan infrastructure law that gets updated regularly as well. So I know that was a lot. I think I stayed under my 10 minutes here. But on the last slide, you can see the links for the routes website as well as our toolkit. Transportation.gov/rural is our homepage. If you need to contact us, rural@dot.gov is is the routes office inbox. But we also have a quarterly newsletter. If you want to sign up for that, there's a QR code right there. The link is too complicated to put into the slide and have folks jot down. If you sign up for our newsletter, you also get announcements and alerts when we have new funding programs announced or different general announcements through the department in addition to the newsletter. So thank you again for having me. I'll put some of the links that I mentioned in the chat, and hope you guys enjoy the rest of this conference.
Thank you, Alex, for that informative overview of the Roots program. We really appreciate it. So now we're actually about 5 minutes behind here, but we are going to give everyone a 5-minute break. So please come back at 11 a.m. Arizona time. So again, we're just going to have a short 5-minute break right now. And the slide shows that we're 5 minutes behind, but we're going to give everyone a couple of minutes. So please come back at 11 a.m. We will begin in 1 minute. All right. Can all of the panelists that are now on this slide please turn on their videos and unmute themselves? Now we're going to take a turn focusing on the electric vehicle economic development and manufacturing hub across the Southwest. We have a fantastic group of speakers for you today to discuss all things the electric vehicle industry from upstream to downstream. So now I will hand it off to the moderator for this panel, Steve Zolstra with the Arizona Technology Council. Steve, please take it away.
Thank you, Karen. It's so good to be here. I'm really excited to moderate this panel. The topic is fostering the Southwest EV economic development and manufacturing hub. And the goal of the panel is to provide an update on where the transportation electrification market and industry are in their development. And the panel will discuss various elements of Arizona's electric vehicle industry, including upstream and downstream activities in the supply chain, as you suggested. We're going to start by asking each speaker to introduce themselves, talk about their role in their organization, talk about their company, and then I will begin asking questions. And we're going to start with Lindsay Gurrell from Core Power. Lindsay?
Yeah, thanks, Stephen. I'm Lindsay Gorel, the founder and CEO of Core Power. Core Power is a U.S.-based lithium-ion cell manufacturer. We produce both NMC and LFP cells. We also produce the batteries, both for EVs and ESS. And then we also develop our own software, and we actually produce finished EV storage solutions also for the market. One of the exciting things is obviously we're in Arizona. We have a huge event on August 23rd is our groundbreaking ceremony for our 2 million square foot lithium-ion cell manufacturing plant. So on August 23rd, we'll be doing a huge groundbreaking on our facility in Buckeye. So we're pretty excited. So that's the overall view of who we are. Thanks.
Thank you, Lindsay. Next, we're going to turn to David Rubin. David is going to speak on the opportunity Cruise sees for automation and transportation electrification for both light-duty vehicles as well as private fleets, rideshare, and delivery benefits for light-duty vehicles. Lindsay? I'm sorry, David?
No worries. Thanks, Steve. Appreciate it. Hi, everybody. Morning for those of you in Pacific time here. My name is Dave Rubin. I'm on the government affairs team for Cruise. We're a fully electric, shared, and self-driving car service based in San Francisco, but I have a very exciting delivery partnership with Walmart in the broader Phoenix area that I'll be speaking to later today. On the government affairs team, I'm responsible for kind of exploring the ways in which these shared autonomous and electric vehicles can deliver some of the exciting policy benefits for our transportation goals around reducing emissions, ensuring more equitable access to clean miles, and delivering more time and more space in our urban cities for the public to travel. We've made some really exciting accomplishments in the last couple of months, including the receipt of our California Public Utilities permit to offer fully driverless rides in San Francisco, and have also announced the expansion of several new stores for our Phoenix partnership with Walmart. So diving into those later today. Thanks so much.
Thank you, David. Very much appreciate that. Next, we'll hear from Kathy Knoop with General Motors, and she'll talk about the expanded community charging program in locations where EV charging access is often limited, which we heard about this morning, as well as touch on their ongoing efforts to electrify future vehicles. Kathy?
Hi, Steve. Thanks for having me. It's nice to be here with all of you guys. Loved hearing the morning session. My background with General Motors is about a year now, but previous to that, I worked for both Salt River Project and Arizona Public Service. The last 9 years or so, I was focused completely on electric transportation. So it's been great to see how Arizona has moved forward and what the NEVI funding is going to be doing for us as a state on expanding EV infrastructure. At General Motors, my role is actually now manager of EV stakeholder solutions. And in this role, I work with stakeholders, whether it's cities, public utility commissions, or utilities across the U.S. to help get a better relationship between General Motors, the projects we're working on, and the goals and desires of those groups as well. But specifically today, I wanted to talk about the investment in infrastructure that GM is making. We've announced about $750 million of infrastructure investments. That includes DC fast charging, but what I really wanted to talk about today is our dealer community charging program. General Motors is making 40,000 level 2 chargers available to our dealerships across the United States. And that is in all the rural communities, that is everywhere across the US. It's a voluntary program for those dealerships. But if they choose to, they can have up to 10 19.2 kW stations given to them by General Motors. And those dealerships will then seek out a community partner in their community to be the site host for those charging stations. It's a great way to get more higher powered level 2 out in the community, hit some of those rural areas that may not already have charging. And we provide some guidance on where to put those, who those site hosts should be. The utility or the dealership itself will provide up to 3 years of maintenance and networking. These are network capable charging stations. They're capable of load management programs as well. And then the site host will be looking to do the installation. And that's where the site host will be looking also to maybe some of the NEVI funding once we've built out our corridor stations, the additional funding that can be used for other purposes, for funding and grants that are available from cities and from other federal infrastructure programs to help install those, including utility-based programs. So I'll stop there and move on to our next folks so that we can answer a lot more questions going forward.
Thank you, Kathy. Next, we're going to hear from Kevin Pavlov with Electromechanica. And Kevin will speak about their assembly and engineering and development in Mesa for the Solo, E-Roadster, and Tofina electric vehicles. Kevin?
Thanks, Stephen. So I'm Kevin Pavlov, the CEO of Electromechanica. We are a unique company that took a very, very close look at electric vehicles and the whole ecosystem around them to try to figure out a better answer. Not a completely different answer that everybody should drop, but just an answer that's suited for how people use vehicles. Most vehicles are created, they're based off a gasoline engine vehicle, they've been electrified, and they're basically put together. We went a different route. We said, what do most people do every day? So 76% of vehicles drive, or passenger vehicles are alone. You drive all by yourself to work and back every day. About 26% of them drive in carpools. We said, geez, if you're going to back and work all by yourself for all 5 days, why would we use all the extra energy in a battery to heat the other 3 seats, 4 seats, 5 seats that are empty, or cool those same seats? Because if you have to do that, you're actually taking range away from your vehicle. So we created a solution that actually fits the pocketbook. It is tremendously efficient on energy. It takes a lot of burden off the charging infrastructure. It also allows for this particular urban mobility, but allows you to go out onto the freeways, go from town to town with 100 to 150 miles range, depending on what you're doing. So we've been taking a different look at this, and we've been taking a different look at the charging needs and how we would do this. So our solution isn't just for retail customers. Our last mile delivery is one of the biggest things. We've been delivering to commercial fleets who have an individual driver that delivers food. They deliver micro parcels. They do all kinds of security for campus security. They do parking enforcement. Mesa, Arizona bought our vehicle. They actually put it in for their parking enforcement. Not one of our prouder moments, but if you see our quirky little vehicle, don't park bad. So we've got facilities in Vancouver, California, here in Arizona. We're putting up our 238,000 square foot facility right by the Gateway Airport in Mesa. Very proud that will be online on December. And we're really looking forward to further integrating in our community. I'm sitting in Desert Ridge right now, so I have a little further drive down to Mesa, but I think I'm going to be looking at Gilbert to move a little closer.
Thank you, Kevin. Next, we're going to hear from Kunal Felfer with Li-Cycle. Kunal will speak about Li-Cycle's new lithium-ion battery recycling facility in Gilbert, scheduled to be operational in the third quarter of this year. I had the opportunity to be at their ribbon cutting and tour the facility, and it's very impressive. And we'll have some questions later about how that applies to the circular economy. So, Kunal?
Yep, thanks, Steve. And working backwards there, that facility is already operating and shredding batteries. So yeah, Kunal was from Kunal Falfer, Chief Strategy Officer from Li-Cycle. We're a lithium-ion battery resource recovery company based in Toronto, Canada, with multiple operations now running, including Gilbert, Arizona, and Rochester, New York. We're right now building 3 more facilities in the U.S., investing over $500 million in this infrastructure for end of life batteries, and also building 2 facilities in Europe based on our own developed technology, which we spent the last 6 years basically moving from an idea into a commercial operation. Last year also we listed our company publicly on the NYSE, so significant progress in a short amount of time, but necessary, I think, infrastructure as we scale out electrification across the globe.
Thank you, Kunal. And last but certainly not least, Lindsay Stiegel. She's with EVgo, and she'll speak on EVgo's recent electric vehicle supply equipment deployments in Arizona and across the rest of the Southwest. Lindsay?
Yeah, thank you so much. It's great to be here again. I'm Lindsay Stiegel. I'm Manager of Market Development and Public Policy at EVgo, and I'm based in the Denver area and cover the Rocky Mountain and Southwest regions of the country, including Arizona. I just wanted to share a little bit about EVgo to start off. So we own and operate the nation's largest public fast charging network with more than 850 fast charging locations, which are powered by 100% renewable energy. There are a few different EV charging business models you'll see out there. We are an owner operator, which means we develop, finance, own, operate, and maintain our network. And this is different from some other business models that maybe just focus on one aspect of the value chain, like selling hardware, for example. And we partner with automakers like General Motors and Nissan to expand our public charging network. And we're working through a partnership with GM right now to install over 3,200 new charging stalls by 2025. I should mention fleet electrification is also a growing part of our business. And overall, we have set a goal of installing 16,000 fast charging stalls nationwide by the end of 2027. In Arizona in particular, we now have around 11 chargers, and we intend to operationalize 40 to 50 more stalls this year, with even more coming in early 2023. We have quite a pipeline. Most of these will be in the Phoenix area, but certainly the NEVI program funding will spur further investment, and I think will help enable charging providers to bring chargers to the areas where the economics have been more challenging. So we're really looking forward to participating in that program. And I think I'll stop there for now, and I look forward to the discussion.
Great. Any other opening remarks anyone wants to make before we move into the questions?
You know, if I could,
Go
I just
ahead.
wanted to make a comment to remind everybody. I was listening to the earlier sessions. While fast charging is great, level 1, level 2, level 3, however you want to determine, it's the car that actually pulls the power out. So you can have 50 kilowatts, but if the car only has a 6.6 kilowatt charger on it, the car is going to determine what's actually being used. Now, that doesn't mean don't put 50 kilowatt chargers out there. That just means the consumption or the use and the leveraging of that capacity is probably going to be used at the same rate that vehicles install fast charging in their vehicles. And it's a bit of a costly add-on. I mean, you can ask GM, you can ask the other folks as we start to put this technology in a vehicle. The faster you charge, the more it costs to put it in the vehicle to charge that fast. So just keep in mind across the board, that's how it'll probably spool out in terms of utilization of the heavy hitting pieces. Now, buses and trucks and things like that, oh yeah, got to have it, or otherwise they're going to camp out all night charging. But you know, for a lot of the lower end vehicles, they're probably going to be developed with level 1, level 2 charging capabilities.
Thanks, Kevin. I'd like to start by tying my first question to the morning sessions. We talked a lot about the NEVI program. We talked about the Infrastructure Investment Jobs Act, other stimulus-related programs. I'd like to ask each of you, how important are those programs to the future of EVs in the United States, and especially in Arizona? And how important are they to your individual companies? Let's start with Lindsay Gurral again. Lindsay?
Sure, thanks, Stephen. I'll go for the first question first. Second question first. How's it more important to companies like for ourselves? I think the Infrastructure Investment and Jobs Act and associated grant opportunities is geared toward companies like ourselves. As obviously we're building a commercial scale domestic battery cell manufacturing plant. And our strategy is to take advantage of this opportunity. We're working closely with our team in DC, and we've been working closely with Hollow Knight for the last couple of years. Also, it's important for the EV industry as it goes towards helping reduce supply chain bottlenecks, ease inflation, and obviously lower the cost of goods and services. And then on top of all that, it builds a national network of electric vehicle charging stations and benefits the manufacturer of electric vehicles. So I think it's critical for us as a company on that side. And then obviously on the other side, which I think includes, Kunal talked about recycling. I think as a battery cell manufacturer, that's also critical in sustainability in this infrastructure plan that we're working on. And then your first question was, I believe, was how the economic incentives are accelerating the EV implementation of that. I think we have the ability to stimulate it greatly. Just take a look at what's happened to the stimulation that went to solar and wind farms over the last 10 years. There's a specific stimulation directed at that business, which is fantastic, and it grew 10,000 fold over the last 10 years. And I think that government incentives can support scale up publicly accessible chargers, increasingly important, and not just storage, but not just critical for EV charging, but also on the storage side. So I think to have an effective EV charging, it's good to have infrastructure on the storage side also. And I think these incentives continue to make EVs competitive, which is really critical because we all know once we get the EV cost down, the cost to operate an EV is a lot cheaper than the combustion engine. So I think it helps society as a whole, never mind just the green part of it. So I'll stop there because there's a lot more people on the panel. So
let's go to the other Lindsay. Lindsay, you already inferred how important NEVI was going to be for your company. Tell us how it's impacting the industry and you specifically.
Yeah, so for EV charging providers like us, grant programs or incentives play an important role in expanding the availability of charging because they can act as a market stimulant to sort of incent us to extend our infrastructure footprint ahead of when we otherwise might be able to. So they're a really important factor as we look at where to build, where to prioritize our investments. And the funds available from the NEVI program in particular are exciting to us because NEVI has the ability to support operational expenses, which I think was mentioned earlier, but this is really a novel feature. We haven't seen that from public funding programs we've participated in the past. Usually it's just capital expenses. And the reason this is important is because, and many people might know this, but in case you don't, currently we find the most economic locations for DCFCs are in urban and suburban locations because the utilization is there to help offset the cost. And deploying chargers in the less dense corridor locations can really be more economically challenging. You'll see less utilization. Sometimes you have higher operational costs because of how hard it is to get field crews out there and that sort of thing. So that's where this OpEx support will be really vital. It'll enable charging providers to serve areas we couldn't have served otherwise and really fill those gaps in the network.
Kathy, GM had already made a pretty significant commitment to EVs. How are these programs accelerating your push forward?
Well, it's extremely important, especially in states like Arizona that don't already have any particular funding that has been recommended by the governor, the state legislature, or the corporation commission. If you look at a state like Colorado, where the legislature and the commission work together to approve funding of $110 million by Xcel Energy over the next 3 years to help facilitate charging infrastructure, their EV adoption that was below Arizona's has leapfrogged over Arizona. So you can see that putting in infrastructure, incentives, and other mechanisms really help encourage EV adoption. But for General Motors, we're going to electrify our entire line of vehicles. They will all be equipped with DC fast charging. If we can't expect people to be able to drive from Arizona to Nevada or New Mexico and have rapid charging along the way, then people aren't going to be purchasing those vehicles. We talked earlier about how the state is going to be talking to the tribes because a lot of our highways go through tribal lands. This is a great economic development opportunity for them, for staff on the reservation, especially as they're getting more electricians, and there's a lot of electrician training schools that'll be needed to install these stations. So we're going to get them in rural areas, in areas that wouldn't otherwise see this fast charging electrification because it may not be that economically viable. The utilization won't be that high, but this NEVI funding infrastructure is just key to the adoption of EVs in the future, so people are comfortable traveling across the state.
Thank you, Kathy. Kevin, you have a different situation. You're, started up a brand new company from scratch. And how critical are these governmental programs for your success?
I think they're essential. Without having to reflect everything that was already said, because I agree with it, I'm going to put a different perspective in. When there's an offering of money, then a lot of people come together with a lot of great minds. And those great minds think of great solutions. And they think of creative solutions, not just the ones in the center. I mean, they look back at history and they say, geez, look at how computers went from a central processing unit or a mainframe out to distributed processing. Now we have energy that goes from a centrally generated energy to maybe a distributed energy. I look at Arizona is the Persian Gulf of solar energy. I mean, you're really seriously on the number of days that it's up and the amount of energy we can collect. It's just incredible opportunity, right? So this is why the NEVI program and the federal programs combined together are going to bring the best minds that will come up with a widest variety of creative solutions, not only on the operations side, but also on all of the angles that we'll be able to fit it into. So I'm just reflecting my agreement with everybody. It's essential for us as a startup. Again, I'm probably, not the big GM side of things, but from an urban mobility side, I mean, I can get you all around your town. There really is no range anxiety. If you own a vehicle and you normally drive 20 miles a day and you own an electric vehicle and you always have enough power, you're not even thinking of range unless you plan on going on a long trip. Then you go to the range anxiety. I can tell you all right now that I've learned this. I have a lot of people that drive a lot of electric vehicles, and when they get back into their gasoline vehicle that only has a quarter of a tank of gas in it, they get just as bad range anxiety because they're not sure how far they can go on the quarter of a tank because they haven't driven it. So it's kind of interesting to watch this evolution come about where we're all pulling solutions in from all kinds of different angles, the right tool for the right job. I look at it that way, right? We're not just all selling nails and hammers. There's screwdrivers, there's fast bits, there's all kinds of things. So it's really essential to look at all the programs that NEVI's offering, look at the federal programs, try to figure out how do you get a fit, especially if you have a passionate idea that needs to get into the marketplace because we need solutions.
Thank you, Kevin. David, Cruise is an altogether different business model. And how are these government programs, this stimulus, if you will, supporting your company?
Well, I think from a strategic level, Cruise is extremely supportive of any government investment that is going to encourage the public to transition from a primarily ICE-based travel system to one that's based on electric vehicles or just more generally zero-emission vehicle platforms, right? Cruise made an investment very early on to be all electric. We fundamentally believe in the importance of reducing transportation emissions. And so, from our perspective, the IIJA money and the NEVI program could be as impactful as, anything since LBJ's Great Society investment, right? And we're tremendously excited about the ability for it to drive up public confidence in the availability of charging infrastructure and closing a lot of the gaps that Lindsay was mentioning around the density of DCFCs that have really kind of been accelerated towards urban cores, because that's where a lot of the utilization, at least today, takes place in this interim period before we see broader EV adoption. Now, from Cruise's perspective, we are not eligible for NEVI funding. We own and operate this fleet, as I shared, and all of our charging infrastructure is behind the fence. So it is a shared private fleet model because of our high utilization needs. Our fleets of autonomous vehicles typically see charger utilization anywhere from 65 to 75%, which is dramatically higher than public utilization of DC fast chargers right now. And because of that demand, we have to do kind of this behind the fence charging. But that's not to say that we won't benefit, at least tangentially, from the NEVI program. As Lindsay was talking about, the availability of this funding is going to be really impactful in changing the site economics and unit economics of getting more chargers in the ground. And where I think that Cruise can plug in here is as more of the chargers are built on these corridors, and then as we look to build out more of the urban core, Cruise's fleet can kind of help serve as an anchor tenant, where we have these almost hybrid shared, public and private charging stations at the same piece of real estate or same piece of property. And that's really, really impactful for helping the EV service provider or charging company maintain high levels of utilization at that site while still freeing up more chargers for the public to access. And I think there's a lot of really great synergies there for fleets and public charging providers to work hand in hand.
Very good. Thank you. Kunal, you're sort of at the end of life for batteries, and this was a major concern about EVs for a long time. What are we going to do with all those batteries? And you have a solution for that. How have these incentives, these government programs assisted you in your quest to become the end of life savior, if you will, for this industry?
Hey, he's the beginning of Second Life. What do you mean?
Second Life.
He's the birth of Second Life, not the end of First Life.
That's right.
Yeah, I mean, I think we were on the path to build out the infrastructure anyway, just like, even the last year or two, many of the auto companies have already committed. I mean, Lindsay was talking about his Coreplex or Gigafactory, Mega Factory. They were already on the path to build that. I think the DOE funding, for example, is just going to help accelerate some of those investments and maybe add on investments into new technologies, new battery technologies and the like. But I think it's bringing a lot of awareness to this space and how we can domesticate the entire supply chain and not just rely on, say, foreign technology or foreign approaches and really build out the full supply chain for the EV industry. So I think parts of things were going to happen anyway. This will just help increase the speed and maybe bring new innovations to the market.
That you're aware of, is there any of the funding that's available for companies like yours that are addressing the recycling?
Yeah, so there's the DOE loan program and then the DOE grants that they put out, a lot of funding available for localized critical material production, including recycling. So there's lots of opportunity out there to capture that and help scale the business faster potentially.
Excellent.
Yeah, and it's critical that as a cell manufacturer and with Lifecycle as a recycler and a Second Life, right? Us working together is really important as you start to advance design and that kind of stuff. So it makes it easy to recycle. And I think it's great that these things are happening. So
I think you even announced your collaboration with Lifecycle early on when you were announcing your move here to Arizona. So that collaboration is going to be critical. David, I want to go back to you on this next question because this came up a lot this morning, especially in the chat around what are the barriers that the industry is facing and what are the barriers that you're facing as an organization? You talked about your behind the fence recharging. We heard a lot, particularly again in the chat this morning, about the lack of reliability for chargers. You know, have you experienced that? What other barriers have you seen to implementation of your strategy?
Thanks, Dave. So I think, predominantly it's a lack of awareness about some of the benefits that electric ride sharing like Cruise can provide really can generate in terms of emissions reduction and expanding the public's access to cleaner miles. And that really comes just down to education, right? And the onus is on Cruise and our partners in this space to really ensure that policymakers and regulators and the public recognize what those benefits look like. Data from UC Davis here in California has shown that an electrified Uber or Lyft vehicle can have 3 times the carbon reduction as an electric personal vehicle, simply on the number of miles that it drives. And those benefits are scaled dramatically when you think about a service like Cruise that operates off of renewable power, both in California and in Arizona. But some of the challenges beyond that are really, it's actually apropos of the first question that we had, which is around NEVI funding and Cruise's lack of eligibility. Despite some of these benefits that we see, a lot of our existing infrastructure programs remain relatively rigid in terms of their eligibility requirements, specifically looking for 24/7 public access for DC fast charging, and a number of design parameters that really almost in some ways reflect a gas station model. And as we look towards kind of the future of electrification, where public charging and privately owned vehicles and fleets can kind of share in these benefits together, it's Cruise's view that we need to start encouraging kind of broader eligibility programs that can be creative in the way that we build out sites, and really ensure that electric vehicle services, not just electric vehicle ownership, but services are available more broadly to the public so that anyone can share in a clean mile, regardless of whether they can afford an EV or easily access a charger.
Very good, thank you. Lindsay Stiegel, what about EVgo? What are some of the barriers you see in your area, specifically to your company?
Yeah, I wanted to mention a couple of sort of logistical barriers that we run into in the development of EV chargers that can really slow down the process and can really impact how many chargers we can install in a given time frame. And I think this will be relevant for NEVI as well. One of these is local permitting. It's not the most exciting topic, but in the course of installing a fast charger, we need to get a permit from the local government, and in many places this can take a long time, and many local jurisdictions aren't familiar with this type of project, or maybe this is their first time seeing this type of project. And of course there's numerous different local jurisdictions that each have their own processes and perspectives and plans, so we see a lot of inconsistency in this space. Currently it takes about an average of 18 months to deploy a fast charging station, but we think with the right process improvements, and a lot of this is in permitting, it could be reduced to 6 months, which is actually the stated goal in the NEVI guidance. So we do work with local jurisdictions to help them improve these processes. We've talked with City of Phoenix here, who has some goals to streamline their EVSE permitting process within the year. So we're really hopeful there will be some progress there. And I just want to throw it out there, we're always helpful to be happy to be a resource in this space. We've done work in a lot of different jurisdictions and have put together, best practices on this. We know some examples out there of streamlined processes, so always happy to share.
Very good, thank you, Lindsay. The other Lindsay, what about in the battery space? What are some of the barriers and hurdles that you're faced in implementing your strategy here in Arizona?
I think on the EV charging with battery backup storage and that kind of stuff, and all the ESS side, where things are moving fast and growing quite. We're tied up with a number of different companies. On the EV itself side, we're successful in Europe right now. We're successful in the United States. with some of the smaller facilities. The hardest thing for us really is the big U.S. OEMs are all tied with foreign companies. So all their battery comes from foreign companies, and trying as a U.S. company trying to get in that door is somewhat difficult. But I think we're growing in the EV market. It takes a little bit longer than ESS, but we're being very successful in our growth. More in some of the smaller vehicle side.
Kevin, again, you're coming from a different place. Tell us about some of the barriers you've had in, breaking into this industry and, in many ways, leading with some innovation.
Yeah, it's kind of interesting. So we were struggling with our vehicle actually being an EV, and the problem is the battery's too small. We only have 17 kilowatt hours of battery, and I guess for some of the grants you have to have at least 40. So although we are a real EV, we don't quite qualify as per the definition. So you were mentioning maybe a little more lobbying, telling our folks, trying to find a better way for them to redefine some of the elements. So that was one of the pieces, is definition of support. The next piece really runs into, we have a lot of our commercial customers. So they're buying our vehicles for last mile delivery, small parcel, food delivery, things like that. They want to lease a charger with our vehicle. So as they buy a number of vehicles for each of their locations or franchise locations, they're saying, hey, I want to put a charger in. So what we're starting to do is trying to build a model up that says, okay, I'll lease you a charger. You put the underground wiring in, we'll give you the bollard, and because it's a private use piece, they're directly connected in because it's for their delivery network. So we've got now 30 commercial customers, and about 10 of them right now have asked for that, and it's getting more and more popular that they just want to roll that into their lease for their multiple vehicles, which is kind of handy. So we can see some elements there, but that doesn't fit all of the other categories of support funding. So we're working on that. We've also got some other solutions where we bring power as a service. We're bringing power to the location. So those are some other answers that we're trying to work out. You don't need the permits. It's getting a little easier. You can swap out the battery pieces. So connecting with Core Power, maybe getting the bollard heads from EVgo. I've got recycling battery here. I can get rid of my recycled batteries now because you're over in Gilbert. I'm loving this game. And by the way, we're working with GM too, just in the background, and you can check on us. So.
Yeah, I want to add one more thing to that. So I think it's what's really critical. We've been doing, like with Kevin's company and other companies, is that some of these smaller EV companies that are trying to go to scale, as a battery and cell producer, we're working with them, obviously confidentially, on working with their platform. How do we design something specifically for their platform to make it more effective? So I think that's really important too, where everybody's working together, whether it's recycling, whether it's EV charging, whether it's EV and the battery cell guys working together to build the best product you can in the United States.
That's exactly it. I'm a domestic product, so 74% plus, maybe a little Mexico, a sprinkle of Canada, but that's my goal, and that's what's coming out of Arizona. So yeah, I'm definitely looking for a domestic footprint, domestic product, and if I could do it on the whole value stream all the way out to the recycling side of it, I would love to have the answer. Especially if it's close, then I don't have to ship things around because logistics costs are a nightmare, and you guys all know that. So.
Kunal, on the recycling side, I know that you have this collaboration with Core Power and probably influencing some of the design and manufacturing of their batteries so that they can be more easily recycled. What are some of the other barriers that you face from an industry standpoint or from a company standpoint?
Yeah, I think, I wrote it in the chat. There was a question about this, but even 3-4 years ago, a lot of groups were asking about design for recycling. Sometimes it goes hand in hand with their design for servicing. But as a recycler, we don't want to guide how the battery is designed for the performance or application. So we've always taken the philosophy that build the most robust system that can handle varying sizes and shapes of batteries. We've always been able to shred like a module from an EV pack. I know the Gilbert, Arizona facility is the first of our next generation where we can shred the entire pack. So the onus then isn't on the manufacturer to ensure it can be recycled. As a recycler, we're making sure everything will go in the same system and can be recovered effectively. And so I think I wrote in the chat that the system's able to take everything from cell manufacturing, including powders and scrap cathode, through to full EV packs, rather than taking that design for recycling approach. Obviously, materials change over time, etc. But we have to remain flexible to be able to accommodate new things like silicone and other materials that go into the battery.
Very good. Kathy, General Motors has overcome some significant hurdles in its history, and you've made a huge commitment now to electric vehicles. What are some of the, you're the largest company, at least in the discussion here today. What are some of the hurdles you see as a large automaker?
Yeah, so from a small perspective, Lindsay sort of stole that thunder with permitting, because we're going to need all these charging stations out there to support the vehicles that we're building. I think we predicted by the end of 2024 we'll have 400,000 EVs that we're selling. So we're going to really grow and ramp up manufacturing. We've got 3 local plants that we've converted to manufacturing EVs. We've got 2 battery plants that we're building here domestically to build our Ultium battery cells. That's probably going to expand and continue to grow. Investments by all automakers are really increasing. So we're looking forward to this infrastructure. I think a challenge for us, and I think a challenge for everybody who's looking to supply NEVI funding, one of those is the inability to put fast charging at rest stops. There's a federal law that prohibits commercialization at rest areas, which are already there and ready to go, but you can't build there. And some of those locations, I think of Arizona, just between Phoenix and California and the raw desert that's out there. Some of the rest areas are the only logical place to put any kind of DC fast charging. I think I get very concerned about myth busting, that folks will chime in and say, well, really, we shouldn't build this infrastructure because battery swapping is going to be the thing. And so we'll have stranded assets. And, battery swapping is great for the Nero EV or whatever in China, but domestic manufacturers are all building their battery configurations differently. And Lindsay can talk to that, because they're working with individual manufacturers to design batteries for their application. So battery swapping isn't going to be ubiquitous anytime in the near future. We're doing a lot of wireless roadway experimentation, but the vehicles being built now are using either CCS1 connectors, J1772 connectors for level 2 and level 1 charging, Tesla connectors, and the CHAdeMOs that are still going on with the Nissan. Those are the standards that are out there. We need to focus on building infrastructure to meet the standards that are currently existing. So I think myth busting to me is one of the biggest barriers in education. We just need to educate our legislators. We need to educate our government officials. Yes, we need to educate dealers as well. And we do have a real robust dealership education program. We need to educate utilities. I mean, educate. And I know that's something that Sweep and Plug in America, that's their core goal, is to educate people on the benefits and the truths around electric vehicles.
And
By the way,
Kathy,
go ahead.
sorry, Kathy, you jumped on. You said something that we're been looking at on the rest stops, having EV charging all across the country. Yeah, we launched a mobile energy storage solution, and we're working with an EV charging company now to build those. Maybe we can just roll them in. So they're not permanent installations though, but we can roll them in.
And we got away with that with doing some food trucks at rest areas, doing that a little bit during COVID, and I think that that's a great idea, is bringing in some mobile charging. We should be able to make use of those assets that are already there. So I get why we don't. I get that there's a strong lobby against that, but I think we need to somehow work out a way that in certain locations it's going to be critical to be able to utilize those assets.
Yeah, there was an initiative here in Arizona to commercialize the rest stops, but the truck stops had the better lobbyist at the time. So that may be something that gets revisited. So I think everybody understands, one of the major reasons for moving to EVs from internal combustion engines is to lower carbon in this country. But what a lot of people don't understand is the enormous economic development opportunity that EVs represent for this country and especially for this state. There's already comment, we have at least 5 or 6 vehicle manufacturers now and other folks in the supply chain like Li-Cycle and Core Power. Can each of you talk about the economic development opportunity that you bring to Arizona and that the industry brings in general? And let's start with Kathy this time.
Well, I think where I started out my conversation on this, the dealer charging community, where our local dealerships all across Arizona are going to be installing, bringing in these level 2 stations. They're going to be looking at local electricians, local designers to provide that infrastructure. And that's going to be a great opportunity for that economic development in that aspect. As well as the training and the economic development opportunity of the partnership that we have with EVgo, which also utilizes a lot of local electricians and contractors to install those DC fast charging stations. Those are kind of 2 of the areas that I think GM focuses on, how that economic development goes into local jurisdictions across the United States, this supporting of the charging infrastructure.
Excellent. Lindsay Gurrell, same question.
Sure, I think sure. Just on the whole thing, I'm a big believer in sustainability. I'm kind of developed what we call a sustainability valley in the Arizona area. But as a cell manufacturer, we're kind of the core of the industry because above us is obviously OEMs are using whatever cells that people are producing. But as a cell manufacturer, once you have cell manufacturers in the United States, that drives the supply chain to come towards the United States. Whether it's United States, Mexico, Canada, it drives the supply chain. So now we become the customer of your lithium carbonate, your electrolyte, your lithium salts, your anode, your cathodes. So I think for us, we're focused heavily on the upstream, and we're under negotiation. We did an announcement with Novonix on anodes. We've got a couple more announcements coming out on some other products we're going to be producing over here. So I think for us is to drive as much of the supply chain to the United States and hopefully to Arizona, but as a cell manufacturer, we're the customer of that. So it allows them to actually have an economic viable business because we're going to buy their product.
Excellent. The other Lindsay?
This time Kathy stole my thunder. So yeah, I think we will be involved in hiring local contractors and subcontractors to build our stations. But also we're creating a new amenity for local businesses that we partner with to help them draw new customers to their business.
And Kevin?
Yeah, so we've been in a kind of a major shift, particularly in Arizona. We're taking every piece of an electric vehicle, looking at the gasoline powered vehicles and offering the supply chain the opportunity to change. Unlike Eastman Kodak, when they didn't make the shift, we're trying to get other people that are in a business, maybe it's fuel delivery, maybe it's part of the engine processing parts or things like that. And we're collecting them and saying, hey, we've got no legacy EV. Now's the time to step in. Shift your business over. We're small. You can take a baby step, and that's everything from tires, wheels, brakes, all the way up through body panels, interior components, even radios. It goes into the charging infrastructure as well as secondary and tertiary supply chain elements, right down to the silicon side of things. Because we offer 3-wheeled vehicles for purpose-built solo side of it, as well as some 4-wheel vehicle, 2-passenger, we also delve into the lower voltage and medium voltage levels. So when you're talking about 144 volt EV, you're not up into the 400 volts. So we can actually leverage silicon supply that is not being tapped into by the 400 or 800 volt electric vehicles. So this has given a lot of people a chance to step in, do new control systems, retool their existing plants from fuel delivery or internal combustion engines into this new world. And hopefully we're setting the stage on our training and education programs within Arizona and our other automotive OEMs that are all around us to build a new class of people that understand EVs as their primary piece and move it forward. So training to parts to vehicle production, delivery, and understanding licensing across states too, by the way, which is a absolute fun piece of the puzzle.
Kunal, again, economic development benefits from the industry and yourself.
Yeah, I think across North America, much of it's been covered now, but also specific to Arizona. We've built a facility that employs 50 people, but that's just we're one piece of the puzzle. There's the cells, the vehicles, everybody on this group is the full ecosystem, and it comes with a lot of different pieces, and we're just seeing the start of this across North America. It started with cell manufacturing. We're starting to see active material manufacturing, obviously recycling. So there's going to be billions of dollars invested to basically retool the vehicle supply chain that we have here. So there's a lot of new opportunities. I like what Kevin was saying also in terms of educating the new grads, et cetera, to be trained and ready also for this new era.
And of course, you become a supplier of the raw materials necessary to make the batteries at the end of your process, which also creates jobs.
Yeah, exactly. So that's the second part of our process. So it's both ends of the spectrum for us.
Yeah, very good. And finally, David?
Yeah, happy to close this out. I would like to also kind of bring to the table the perspective of the service provider, which I think is, presents tremendous opportunity for job growth, reskilling. A lot of the folks on this panel are focused in the manufacturing and charging infrastructure space, but as a provider of a transportation service, there's a lot of opportunities as well for job creation. So from Cruise's perspective, we own, right now in San Francisco, at least about 40% of the DC fast chargers that have been installed in that city. We are going to need a tremendous amount of charging as we build out our services more broadly in Arizona, including in Phoenix. And so there's a lot of employment requirements to get those chargers in the ground. But as we look towards expanding the size of our fleet as well, at the very minimum in the high hundreds and then most likely into the thousands per market that we serve, you need a tremendous amount of vehicle technicians and experts that are going to need to be trained in maintaining those electric vehicles. We work very closely with, obviously, General Motors on the training for our technicians that currently service our vehicles in San Francisco and Phoenix. There's a lot of opportunities there in that space, especially as we transition more generally from a gas-powered reality to one that is fully electric. I think we're obviously going to see some frictional unemployment, especially from those who work in the automotive space on doing vehicle servicing. And these high mileage fleets present a really great way to transition a lot of that labor force towards vehicles that still may be less mechanically complex than today's ICE platforms, but due to their high mileage nature, will certainly need a lot of O&M required on them. And then looking towards the future, there's all of these ancillary benefits to a service like Cruise as well in terms of providing more affordable delivery options to local businesses, obviously providing the ability for individuals to access more employment through more affordable transportation. So there's the direct benefits through manufacturing and service, and then these ancillary benefits as well that we hope to generate through the broader impact that we can have on the local economy.
Thank you,
Stephen.
David.
Sorry, Stephen. As everybody's talking here, what would be kind of cool, Stephen, maybe to work on as you look at developing qualified individuals, which is schooling. Like obviously we were working with the colleges, the tech schools, universities last year, but maybe have a group of maybe head of all our HR companies, all the HRs of our companies or something in a group with you, Stephen, talking about what are we looking for? Because maybe as a bigger group, I mean, we're employing thousands of people with all of us, and maybe we're all looking for the same type of people. So maybe we can actually generate interest for a tech school to develop that type of person or a college developed that type of person. Just a thought that popped in my head when we were talking about this.
No, it's a great idea. I actually saw that ASU now has a program focused on batteries, by the way, and we have had a company leave and move to Ohio called Empower that was building cells, and they said it had to do with not being able to find the right talent. So I think bringing us together would be very helpful. I'm going to assume we have 5 more minutes because we started 5 minutes late, and I'm just going to open this up. We heard a lot, particularly from those from the state and federal government today, about the importance of equity in rolling out both infrastructure and EVs generally. Do you believe that that is possible? As we know, the initial plan is going to be to put EV charging stations just on essentially federal highways, and there will be more options later. But is this industry going to be able to address the equity issue that the government is requiring? And I'll open it up to any of you that have comments on that. And if not, I'll call on you.
I'm happy to speak to it a little bit. The topic I talked to today was about, dealer community. And if you notice that many dealerships, a lot of the new ones are located in upscale communities, but a lot of the existing dealerships are in disadvantaged communities, industrial areas, and they will be putting those stations, within, say, 10 miles of their dealership, no more than that, because they're limited to installing those in their specific community or neighborhood. But I think also about the NEVI funding and the DC fast charging, and they're looking at a big portion of those benefits to go to disadvantaged communities. So I think when the states are building out their plans and they're evaluating, some of the contractors that are being used by the successful bidders, are they looking at women-owned businesses? Are they looking at Black-owned businesses? Are they looking at Native American electrical companies? Are they looking at underserved people from underserved communities who own those businesses who will receive the advantages than the payment of doing that work? And I think that's going to be critical. So it's not just locating in a specific address. It's how do you evaluate who's part of the team that's building those charging stations and where did they come from and what are those companies based on? So that's a way that I look at it happening. Now that said, from GM, who's not actually building any charging stations, but that's the way I look at the opportunity.
Very well put. I think we have time for maybe one more comment, if anyone has one on that issue.
I've got one if that's okay. First, I wanted to mention, I think it's notable that equity is like such a major topic in this space. I was at the Fourth Roadmap conference last week, and it seemed to come up in like every session. So I think that's a huge step forward that we're talking about it early in this transition, whereas in a lot of other cases, it has been kind of an afterthought, and we end up playing a game of catch up. So props to us for talking about it, but that is only the first step. So I will mention what we're working on, which is siting chargers more equitably. So for our network planning, we have a model that takes into account a lot of different factors to identify the best sites for our chargers, the most convenient sites for our customers. And we have built equity into that model. We use the EPA's EJ Screen tool, and we have goals to deploy an increasing number of chargers in communities that are disproportionately impacted by air pollution. And this is something that the EJ Screen tool is an open source mapping tool. It's available, so state DOTs could build this into their scoring criteria for NEVI applications as well. That's one way they could look to address that. But of course, siting is only one piece of the puzzle, and I think there's a lot of other pieces and other barriers to overcome as well.
Well, thank you, Lindsay, and thank all of you for being available for this session today. I can't believe the hour went so fast. I think I only got through about a third of my questions. So really appreciate your time and your commitment to this industry and to Arizona. And I'll turn it back over to Karen.
Thank you so much, Steve, and thank you all the panelists for participating today. This was a great conversation on all areas of the EV supply chain from cradle to grave and how Arizona is positioned to tackle these issues head on. So thank you for the conversation. And with that, I am pleased to present to you all. We have a special recorded statement from Senator Mark Kelly, and he unfortunately was not able to participate with us in real time today, but he was excited to share with us a note in this particular discussion on the federal stimulus. And while for those who may not be as familiar with Senator Mark Kelly's background, this is some quick information about his biography and his work. Mark Kelly's been in service to the United States for many years, first as a Navy combat pilot, as well as a NASA astronaut, as well as now a U.S. Senator for Arizona. And in his first year in the U.S. Congress, he has played a key role in shaping and passing the historic bipartisan infrastructure law, which was the main topic for today's conversations. And this law focusing on improving everything in Arizona in terms of our roads, bridges, water systems, ports of entry, high-speed internet, electric vehicle infrastructure, wildfire response, and so much more, truly. As for his current assignments, Senator Mark Kelly serves on the Armed Forces, Environment and Public Works, Energy and Natural Resources, Aging and Joint Economic Committees. He is now also the chair of the Emerging Threats and Compatibility Subcommittee of the Senate Armed Forces Committee. And this is where he's focusing on ensuring the U.S. has research and technology needed to outcompete with our adversaries like China and other groups in other countries across the globe. Senator Kelly is married to former Congresswoman Gaffe Givers, and they live in Tucson, Arizona. And with that, we are going to go ahead and share the recorded statement from Senator Mark Kelly. Please enjoy.
Hello, everybody. I'm Senator Mark Kelly. Thank you for inviting me to speak with all of you today as a part of the Arizona Transportation Electrification Forum. All of us know that Arizona is becoming a national and global hub for advanced manufacturing and next generation technologies. Whether it's autonomous vehicles, microchips, or advanced medical devices, innovators from around the country see Arizona's pro-business approach as the right place to grow their businesses. And thanks to the bipartisan infrastructure law, which I helped negotiate last year, Arizona now has a once-in-a-generation opportunity to lead the country in the emerging field of electric transportation. Arizona is already home to companies looking to transform the way we build and power electric vehicles and to find ways to sustainably reuse battery technologies. Now, the National Electric Vehicle Infrastructure Program provides us with a unique opportunity to transform our roadways throughout Arizona to supercharge our growing EV and battery industries. As you all know, electric vehicles have come a long way over the past decade, and nearly 50,000 Arizonans have already made the switch to an electric vehicle. But for many of us, especially in the West, where road trips involve driving hundreds of miles, the lack of reliable charging infrastructure can cause range anxiety. That's what the bipartisan infrastructure law seeks to solve. That's why we created the National Electric Vehicle Infrastructure Formula Program, to create a reliable, dedicated stream of funding to states to help electrify our transportation infrastructure. And we didn't stop there. I was part of the working group of 11 Republicans and 11 Democrats who finalized the infrastructure deal. And as part of these negotiations, we got bipartisan agreement to provide an additional $2.5 billion for discretionary grants for charging and fueling infrastructure to allow cities, counties, and tribes in Arizona to receive additional funding for new electric vehicle infrastructure. Now, it's up to our in-state leaders to build the plan for how we leverage these resources to grow Arizona's economy. That's why it's so encouraging to see all of the key entities in the state EV infrastructure deployment plan process engaged with a truly diverse set of Arizona stakeholders. And I'd like to thank the leadership at ADOT, the U.S. Department of Transportation, MAG, the Arizona Corporation Commission, our utilities, and our stakeholders. These constructive engagements are critical to making sure Arizona is on the front end of electric vehicle deployment. After all, these new investments have the potential to create thousands of additional good-paying jobs throughout the state, improve our air quality, and turn the corner as we seek to combat the effects of global climate change. I look forward to hearing more about how the conversations in our state evolve as we work to put our plans into action. And please know that me and my team are always here to serve as a resource and to be an advocate on the federal level for Arizona and for projects throughout our state. So thank you again for the time. Thank you for your leadership. And now let's get to work.
And a special thank you to Senator Mark Kelly's team for that special message. Thank you again. All right, so for now on, we are going to take a quick break before we go into our breakout sessions. So we can plan to have a break now until about 12:15. So please, everyone, take a couple minutes to stretch, get another glass or cup of coffee if you need it, and we will see you soon. Hello, everyone. I hope you had a nice break. We are going to go ahead and begin our breakout sessions. In a moment here, you should see a indication in the upper right-hand corner of your WebEx screen. You should be able to see a pop-out coming out shortly to allow you to choose which breakout session you would like to participate in. You are more than welcome to choose a different breakout if, based on the conversation today, you're inspired to have a different discussion than the one you originally registered for. So feel free to do that. So once that session or once that pop out is made available for you, please go ahead and go into your breakout session.
I believe everyone in the room should be a panelist now. You should be able to unmute yourself and turn your camera on.
Welcome, everyone. I will be one of the moderators for this breakout group. My name is DJ. I'm a federal climate organizer with Chispa, Arizona. Chispa, Arizona is an organization that is working to organize our Latinx communities to grow political power and civic engagement around environmental justice here in Arizona.
And I will be your other moderator for today's breakout session. My name is Sosen. I also work at Chispa, Arizona as our Clean and Green campaign manager. Our Clean and Green campaign this year is focused on electrifying public transportation and transportation in general for Maricopa County. So very happy to be here today as your other moderator. I'll pass it back to DJ.
Before we get started, if everyone could introduce themselves in the chat with your name and the organization that you're representing. And then too, so that you're aware, I am recording audio just for note-taking purposes. Okay. We've got quite a diverse mix of folks in the room today. We'll give people a couple more seconds to introduce themselves. Did you want to share your screen with the slide?
What image should we be displaying? Ellie, should I be displaying the slide you all sent over, or do you want to display this image?
You can go ahead and display the slide.
Okay.
Thank you both.
All right, can everybody see the slide?
Yep, it's all good for me.
Thank you.
With our discussion, really looking forward to see what you all have to offer in the way of questions and insight that we can share with the team. The first question we wanted to present was how can we think beyond vehicles in multimodal transportation strategies to ensure an effective handshake between transit vehicles, bikes, and pedestrians? So, yeah, just want to look at how we look at the wider transportation, especially keeping in mind that our breakout group, obviously, right, is focusing on underserved communities. So when we think about underserved communities, BIPOC communities, thinking beyond just EV charging, but EV infrastructure and how all modes of transportation relate for these communities. Yeah. Feel free to come off mute if you've.
Hey everyone, this is John Heckman. Can you all hear me? I mean, I think that it's an incredibly broad, complex topic, right? So challenging to get at it succinctly. But as some of the speakers this morning were talking about it, this is a transition that we're going through that is not something that happens very often. And it's one that is a big opportunity for us to try to right wrongs that have been made in the past. However, it's also one that is, and maybe this is similar to things in the past, but it's definitely one where many different entities are investing a lot of money. And so the amounts of capital that are being deployed from public sources, but also private investments is substantial. And so it's hard to get a hold of. It's hard to influence everyone. And so bringing the importance of this equity conversation into a really broad level of awareness, I think is critical because there's so many different groups who are in the process of making these decisions. And I think the key point is that if we don't emphasize the importance and really drive and demand action that is going to benefit folks who are traditionally more disadvantaged, we're going to just continually multiply and leave folks behind even further because these investments are being made no matter what. The flip side of it is there's big opportunities to actually do a lot of good where we need to have pilot efforts, trial different technologies, and we can be investing and partnering with communities who can really benefit from these technologies, both on the public transportation side as well as private transportation. So I just think it's a huge awareness opportunity, but one that we need to influence a lot of different people to make decisions that are going to be more beneficial to a broader swath of our population.
The like the I-17, I-40, I-8, I-10 freeways in Arizona, and so basically large charging plazas where people traveling in state and through the state can have a place to charge. As you saw, it's about 76 million over 5 years, which is actually not that much. The key thing when you're thinking about this.
Thank you, John. You make a very good point. If we don't involve the communities that are most impacted by being underserved, then we're going to just replicate the same problems over and over again. So thank you for that. Anybody else have thoughts around the question or need us to repeat it? I can also put it in the chat as well. Let me do that.
You, Benjamin, it doesn't look like it's working. Sorry, Benjamin, I'm not able to figure out how to unmute you. Would you mind putting your thoughts in the chat?
And while he's doing that, I'm happy to feed in a little bit on the initial question. Something that we've been thinking a lot about over on the Plug in America side is that, well, it's really amazing to see all of these conversations really starting to center around equity. I think there are a lot of different definitions of what that means. And everyone has kind of a different understanding of what equity means to them. And we're kind of speculating on what these community needs are for different kind of populations. We're talking about, even within the state of Arizona, we're talking about urban populations, rural populations, indigenous populations that all have different types of needs. And I think a big thing for us is trying to figure out how we include those communities in these conversations. Because a lot of the conversations that we've been a part of so far, valiant efforts have been prescriptive in terms of what the community needs as opposed to listening to what they need. So I think a first step as we see it is trying to figure out how we truly engage those communities to get direct feedback instead of trying to find proxies who have been able to do that in the past.
Thank you. You raised a good point, and this wasn't one of our planned questions, but I'm curious to hear if anyone else has experienced with that direct outreach to the community. I think you make a good point, and a lot of times, we stakeholders do so through proxies, right, and community organizations and such. I'm curious, what some of y'all's involvement has been, or what you've seen, what you would like to see in terms of getting that direct community feedback.
So I would say it's one of the core challenges. We've done this a few ways through the TE activator within the greater Phoenix area. But one was in relation to a project we did with some graduate students at ASU. And I guess it's actually I think it's one of the core challenges here, where you can't expect folks of less advantaged communities to be able to have time to spend talking about topics like this all the time, because there's so many other priorities that are going on in their communities. And transportation is no doubt fundamentally critical, but it is one that is a big enabler around a lot of other stressors. And so a model where we are, groups are trying to invest monies and wanting to engage with communities in this kind of proxy sort of way, I think is kind of flawed in the first place, because I think you just are expecting too much of people to, at least you try to reach out as much as you can, but I know we've had a challenging time to get people to engage on some of these topics. And I think it's partially because there's so many other things that are high priority. And I would say you always want to engage, but the flip side, I think we just need to start spending money in these communities as a priority over any other area geographically and intentionally to try to engage people in an economic way, and then also be listening to them through those processes, but to make sure you're doing it not necessarily academically, but more economically.
Hi everyone, this is Matthew. I'm from the city of Phoenix. I worked on the climate action plan. We work with Masavi Pradea, with Chispa, and so we kind of try to work directly with the community, but we also through proxy too. The difficulties we found were, like you said, availability. Sometimes it was a language. We had a survey available in English and Spanish. We had a couple thousand responses in English and only a couple hundred in Spanish. So it's kind of difficult to see what different communities actually need and want if you can't communicate with them. So that's kind of one of the reasons we're here is to understand what the different communities are interested in, and also just to listen to make sure we're covering those needs so that they're included in the future iterations of the climate action plan. And so just to remind everyone, maybe one of the critiques from CHISPA is that our Spanish outreach was kind of limited. So this was one of the first times we have had a climate action plan, and then we had to translate in Spanish. So that process was new to us. And so to get that going, it took a little extra time, maybe another month. And so we extended our outreach time to account for that. And then we also had technical difficulties because, as we're all in the Zoom world now, there's added features to use Spanish translation services on these. And so we had like a technical difficulty. It was a huge disaster for us. And so we were trying to overcome those kind of challenges in the future and to make sure that, we account for that and have extra time in all the different steps available. So that's kind of what we're working on now. And so thank you for hosting this, and hope that helps.
Thank you both. I'll just share what Benjamin put in the chat. As many standard 20 amp, 120 volt outlets as possible. This is the interface I assume e-bikes would want, but it's also what I plug my, not sure what that phrase is there, to charge at home. Works on greater access to these outlets when revising building codes. Okay. I'll pass it to Susan.
I see that someone put another comment in the chat. Ed Stillings wrote, public involvement is always extremely challenging. Our two large MPOs for Phoenix and Tucson regions have more success as they have large staffs, including staff who speak Spanish. They actively look for festivals and other events in disadvantaged communities where they can have a booth to talk about transportation. I think you make a really good point, Ed, in realizing that the way you outreach different communities has to look differently, right? Like maybe one of the ways we don't get as much response from Spanish speaking people in our community is because we do outreach through outlets that they don't necessarily watch or that they don't necessarily read. So by kind of shifting our outreach and making sure we're meeting people where they're at, we can definitely have better feedback from the community. So thank you, Matthew, as well, for your comments. Does anybody else have anything to add before I move on to our next question? I see Benjamin also wrote something. IME IV equals inexpensive electric car by Mitsubishi, circa 2012 to 2017. Okay. Oh, you were defining the word that DJ had asked about earlier. Thank you. That's very helpful. Any other thoughts from the group before we move on to the next question? Awesome. So when we're talking about closing gaps to underserved communities, I think it's important that we focus on more than just EV charging infrastructure, because that is definitely a gap. But I think a larger gap is people's ability to acquire EV vehicles in the first place. Obviously, they're extremely expensive. And so our next question is, what information can ADOT provide to help consumers acquire electric vehicles, and especially lower and moderate income households? How can people have a better understanding of rebates or grants or different funds that they could access to better acquire electric vehicles?
Can just give you some results from our surveys and stuff and outreach is that a lot of people are more interested in incentives and rebates on actual purchase of the vehicle and not necessarily the information. They know that long term that they'll save money, but they don't have that upfront cost. So that was more helpful for us. And then just another reminder, the City of Phoenix is developing or developed an electric transportation plan. So that's already passed. Maybe I can drop that link in the chat.
Yeah, that would definitely be helpful if there's any specific information in there about rebates or grants that people could share among their circles. Thank you. Any other thoughts on the question?
I know as a prospective buyer myself, something that's super confusing is, and this is the work that I do, so if it's confusing to me, it's confusing to the general consumer, is just trying to understand what's available at any given time. I mean, this space is changing so quickly that it's really hard to keep track of what the incentives are, what the qualifications are, what's the income cap, how do you apply, what's the lead time, like all those questions that make a really big difference to the actual purchaser, because as Matthew was saying, people are concerned with taking money off the hood of the vehicle. They're not concerned with long-term savings as much, or with even the federal EV tax credit, which comes in a year, but really how can they reduce the cost of that vehicle at time of purchase. So I think something that I personally would find helpful, and I assume other consumers might find helpful, is if there was a tool where you could put in your information in terms of location, municipality, things like that, income, whatever it may be, to quantify that information for you. And then you would get a list back that says, okay, you qualify for these particular programs at this time. Here's how long it will take you to get that money back.
I definitely agree with the sentiment of what you said, like being within this industry and still having a difficulty navigating that information definitely means it's not accessible to the general public. So some type of tool or resource people could use to help calculate that information would definitely be extremely helpful. Thank you. Any other thoughts around this question? I see there's some stuff in the chat. Let me go read. Benjamin said Chatamo charging along I-19 to the I-10 corridor. What is that, if you could define it for us? This will facilitate positive integration with EV owners visiting from Mexico. Currently, the I-19 stretch is only provisionally approved on the current ADOT interstate plan, and all charging stations are CCS standard. Thank you. And I see the link for the transportation electrification plan as well. Thank you, Matthew. Okay, there's one more message in the chat. It's a Betamax versus VHS sort of conversation, but different. Okay. I'll pass it to DJ to move on to our next question.
What are some unique challenges for EV infrastructure deployment in Arizona? I'm thinking heat. I'm sure you all go that way too. So what are the unique challenges for EV infrastructure deployment in Arizona, as well as rural, tribal, and urban underserved communities?
I guess I can speak to a little bit about Phoenix, the city of Phoenix. The challenges for us is we're actually to place the infrastructure. So you want to put it where people actually use it. So right now they're looking at doing a study of city facility, city right away, to see where the best place to put those charging stations would be. Would it be at parks? Would it be in neighborhoods? Would it be at the libraries? What public spaces could people use? Would it be best placed where employees are? So if you already have that facility there, have the employees use it, and then the public too. So that's kind of
down the freeways these days in rural areas. It's mostly giant trucks going across country. So, but maybe this is a lead into another question, which is: are there areas not being addressed for underserved communities and what
says, I don't see much discussion today regarding hydrogen fuel cell electric vehicles. I feel that being able to have an electric drive vehicle with centralized fast fueling should be considered for underserved communities. These vehicles also work well in rural areas and can be scaled to medium and heavy duty vehicles without adding too much weight. Ed says, getting power to some of the rural, including tribal areas, may be challenging if not already available. Benjamin adds that the answer is lower cost EVs are going to have smaller batteries, hence lower range. I do just fine in Metro Tucson, but inner city travel, like you find in rural areas, is going to be more challenging. Yeah, I would probably echo that too. Battery incapacities, I think is one of the obvious barriers for rural and tribal communities with long distances to travel. Benjamin says hydrogen in underserved communities. Sorry, that's science fiction.
So this is Lastanya Baker at Toyota, and I'm gonna challenge that one head on. I mean, we've got light duty. There's over 13,000 light duty vehicles in Southern California right now, and those stations are, across the state. They right now are primarily co-located at gas stations, right? So you can put a hydrogen fueling outlet at an existing gas station, and for our vehicles right now on the light duty side, 5 minutes max probably to fuel 400 EV range. Doing that in a rural area is probably a whole lot easier than thinking about putting chargers in those locations. They also work for people who live in multi-unit dwellings. And frankly, I saw a lot of discussion this morning about, EV chargers being vandalized. And, full disclosure, I grew up in Compton in California, so I understand how those things happen in some communities. And having centralized fueling at a gas station, probably for me as a woman, would provide me more security in terms of trying to fuel my car. So I don't see it as science fiction. I see it as something that the states and cities need to be considering.
Thank you so much, Stanya. Stanya, is that how you pronounce your name?
So Lastanya, it rhymes with lasagna, but everybody calls me Stani. And I'm also going to. I don't want to get into a Toyota specific conversation here, but we've been selling vehicles with plugs for probably 20 plus years, and so to suggest that we've been dragging our feet is an unfair characterization. The good news about our company and a lot of companies, right, is we want to sell vehicles to customers who want those vehicles. So we're selling customers vehicles that have plugs and that don't have plugs. And I would say that that's probably true for most folks in the industry. We were listening to GM this morning, for instance, and so we're trying to figure out where the customers are and provide the technology. And I think that's where this discussion ought to center on what works for communities. And so that's my contribution to this conversation today.
Thank you so
One
much.
last quick comment on some of the challenges for underserved communities is a lot of this focus is on DC fast charging sorts of infrastructure, and there's good reason for that. But I think that we need to keep level two infrastructure going as well, because I think there's going to be a lot of vehicles that are going to be in the market, and especially as the used vehicle market starts to develop, that will still be using the level two charging rates there. So we need to make sure we're building out both level two as well as DC fast charging infrastructure.
Thank you, John. Benjamin, if you could keep your comments in the chat related to the discussion, that would be great. Thank you. I'll pass it back to you, DJ.
If you want to give everyone the heads up, we've only got about 4 minutes left. I do want to highlight, I think one thing we kind of breeze over, but in Stania's comment on, I think it is important to consider where we place charging stations. Mastania sharing that as a woman, considering where you're going to pull in and be stationary for a period of time is something definitely to take in consideration. So I just wanted to highlight that again.
And thank you for highlighting the conversation around hydrogen fuel cells, because I also feel like it's kind of been missing from the conversation and how we're transitioning our transit system, both personal vehicles and public. So thank you for bringing that into the conversation. I don't think it's unrealistic at all. But let's go ahead and move on to the next question. So shifting away and from what we were talking about more towards charging infrastructure. The question is, are there areas not being addressed for underserved communities, and what will help to ensure greater access to EV infrastructure? The question also had a second part, which is, what are some locations of cultural or community significance that we should be thinking about when creating EV infrastructure? And also, how are we ensuring safety, which we just discussed, affordability, and a location that's important to community and economic centers?
Benjamin added in the chat that yes, and you would need to have J1772 level 1 and level 2 at these fast charging stations. Unfortunately, not having voice capability makes his messages delayed. So apologies for that, Benjamin.
I think on the how do you address kind of finding community centers, one thing I think about a lot from my own perspective, just growing up, in Brooklyn, is convening at churches and places of worship, and community centers like fitness centers and things like that. I think those are convenient locations for people, locations that people trust, locations that often are safer in the community. So I think that personally, as we're thinking about our planning, it's really important, like, what Matthew was saying and what John was saying in terms of community engagement, to kind of pull out what are those locations for each community. I know, just personally, that's a tidbit from New York, but that could look very different across the state of Arizona.
This is Lastanya. That's very true. We had one of our associations here in Southern California has done a lot of outreach with churches, right? Just to have pastors and members of the church drive these technologies, because sometimes their communities, their congregations don't even know, parishes don't even know and understand the technology, right? They all think that you have to be an affluent sort of Tesla driver to even think about electric vehicles. And when they find out that, there are a lot of vehicles on the market today that are probably as affordable as a cell phone, for instance, right? That technology is available to them, and so having the churches have them, and the next step that we've certainly been trying to have folk think about as it relates to plug-in electric vehicles is having charging available at churches and locations where people spend a lot of time in the community. So I think that's a really good point for a lot of reasons.
Thank you both. Yeah, that's a very important point. We have to consider, where do people congregate? People of different backgrounds have different places where they congregate, and where can we build infrastructure where there's already community and safety and, people around. Thank you both for those points. I see there's a comment in the chat from Benjamin: shade awnings, building them facing south, very important in the desert, that can be retrofitted with PV panels later. Electricity produced there may not offset all electric use, buy some of it. V2G, V2H capability is something that also isn't discussed as often as it should be. Do you mind defining that for us as well, so that we can incorporate it into the discussion? Thank you. Any other thoughts?
I'm happy to verbally define V2G. So V2G is vehicle to grid capability that allows essentially bidirectional charging. There's a lot of different technical terms for it. Benjamin, I'm sure you know much more than me on this. But essentially, it's a flagship product for that is the Ford F-150 Lightning, where they've been touting the capabilities to send power from battery packs in vehicles back to the grid when it's not needed. So that can be used at times of high use, like what one of our panelists was saying earlier, the times between like 4 and 8 p.m. are often high use times on the grid, high strain times. So if the battery is charged, you can send that energy back to the grid to help alleviate that strain. So that's something that can happen on a more regular basis. Another use for V2G is also around resiliency efforts. So in states like Arizona, states like Texas, where it gets really hot and there's a huge strain on the grid, especially during the summer, that's where those options also come in handy. And that's something that you think about in terms of passenger vehicles, but also in terms of heavier duty vehicles like school buses and things like that that have a regular schedule where it's more predictable in terms of use. So that's just a little bit on V2G. Benjamin, hopefully I saved you a little bit of typing, but feel free to add.
Thank you so much for that wonderful definition. Yes, he said that's basically it, but it should be built into smaller and more affordable EVs. Please cross-reference CHAdeMO technical specs in the V2GH discussion. Thank you, Benjamin. Any other comments on this question before we move on to our last question? We have about 3 minutes left.
This is a bit of a similar question to what we asked already, but what are the needs for tribal and rural transportation that location and type of charging stations can help address?
And since we're also in the last 2 minutes, we can also just have it be an open discussion if anyone has any relevant thoughts that they would like to contribute around getting EV infrastructure in underserved communities.
I think one of the things that was discussed and hit on this morning, right, is I think in addition to thinking about the technology and the infrastructure, both charging and fueling infrastructure, perhaps thinking about jobs and skills, right, for some of these communities and making sure that folk who live in those communities, right, get the training and the skills to have jobs related to either the installation, maintenance, or repair of the infrastructure. I think is something that we probably haven't been thinking about as much as maybe we should. So it's not directly to your question, but I think it's something that we probably ought to be thinking about.
No, thank you. That's a very, very good point. I'm not sure if it popped up on your all screen, but we have about 60 seconds left. So I just wanted to close this out by saying thank you all for joining this conversation today. We hope the discussion was helpful.
As we wait for some additional responses, one thing that I will conclude with that I really took from today's conversation is the need for more nuanced, detailed planning with various stakeholders. We have to consider a lot of indirect investments that are going to be coming into developing these charging stations and ensuring that they're utilized properly, that they're maintained properly, and also they're actually they're being usable for each person as intended. So I think having a greater understanding of some of these different investments coming in, and whether that's from utilities, local governments, transit agencies, as well as what ADOT is coming in using with the National Electric Vehicle Infrastructure Program. It's going to require a lot of different hands-on stakeholder conversations. So really what I took from today's forum is that this is really the first conversation that we're going to be having, the first of many moving forward. And I'm really, really thrilled to continue that conversation with all of you. And a couple of things I now see from the chat here, discussions around maintenance and controlling charging rates. I think that's a really important thing, both on the electric tariff side, as well as ideas for bonus points for extra amenities for charging locations, also security cameras, shaded areas, great ideas. And another person just noted a lot of excitement and opportunities for transportation electrification in Arizona. Absolutely. And all right, well, I think we'll just give it one more minute to see if anyone else has any additional highlights they would like to share from today's event. We have another comment saying the need to expand thinking around EVs to include battery electric vehicles, fuel cell electric vehicles, and yeah, absolutely. And looking at the different placement for types of vehicle segments and as that relates to different technologies as they come online. As well as I'm also getting here conversations for expanding stakeholder conversations with Department of Transportation in Arizona, as well as at the federal level as well. And also a statewide EV collaborative to address issues holistically. Yes, absolutely. And I think Kevin here sums this up well for all of us. We are more powerful together than separate, so let's work together. Great, absolutely. Thank you all so much for your comments and thank you all for your participation today. We couldn't do this without your engagement and just your participation and other conversations like this happening across the state. We will definitely have more events like this coming up in the near future, and there'll be plenty of other opportunities to engage on these issues within Arizona. So as a follow-up to this conversation, we will be sending each of you our recording of today's event, as well as all the slides from earlier, and we will be following up with notes and including questions from the chat as well, so that we can ensure everyone gets their questions answered. So with that, I think we will be signing off for now. Again, my name is Karen Potter with SWEEP, Southwest Energy Efficiency Project, and this has been the Arizona Transportation Electrification Forum in partnership with Plug in America. Thank you all and have a great day.